computers.
Go.
All right, and we are live streaming on fox6now.com, Fox local app, and the FOX6 YouTube channel. It is UDecide 2024, our spring election special, and I'm here with FOX6 political reporter Jason Calvi. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for
spending the time with us here tonight. And, of course, FOX6's Amanda St. Hilaire as well.
Hey,
Thank
Brian.
you. So we are going to be here for 2.5 hours straight, correct? Talking about anything and everything.
Unless something goes
related.
horribly wrong.
Yeah, okay. We all just sat down and we've got our notes and we've done our homework, and Amanda's computer is restarting.
We're
So
at 15%,
we are ready
guys.
to go. If you haven't already been out to vote, you still have time. There is another hour and a half before the polls close at 8 o'clock. And there's a lot on the ballot depending where you are. There are different things on the ballot. Of course, it is a presidential primary here in Wisconsin, although it's a pretty unusual one. Because,
It's very anticlimactic.
yeah, both the Republican and Democratic races are already essentially decided. So there are presumptive nominees for both of the major parties. That has not happened. I don't know if it's ever happened before. I know that the research I did shows at least going back to 2000, it hadn't happened. So this is unusual that we get to primary election day in Wisconsin, and we already know who those candidates are going to be. But there's a lot more on the ballot, right, Jason?
That's right. I mean, we have constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. There'll be 2 questions that you'll see at the end of your ballot asking you whether or not the Wisconsin Constitution should be changed. And you're the final say. So your vote tonight is the final say. The legislature passed this in 2 consecutive 2-year sessions, and then it goes to you. That's it. It becomes the state constitution. If you change it tonight, they both deal with elections.
Can I ask you a quick question on that, by the way? Because I was in the voting booth, and I already know that these things can be confusing. I'm going to ask you a question real quick. Should I not drink this coffee, yes or no? Quick answer. It's hard to decide, right?
Is it a
the
negative
double
or a
negative?
positive?
When you're in the booth and you're reading these constitutional questions and they say, shall something not happen, yes or no? It's confusing, right?
Yeah, and the ballot language, and even having done the stories we've done on the stories, you still got to read it a couple times. And actually, on my way out, I heard some people discussing those questions who it sounds like they didn't really know what it was going into it, where it's like, I think it said this. Did you get that? So it was interesting to overhear that conversation.
And if you're confused on the wording, then do you vote yes or do you vote no? Based on the confusion. So the question, if I can read it right now, is should the Constitution be changed? This is question number 1. It deals with election grants. Here's what it says.
Exciting.
I'll explain why it's very exciting and why it was such a big issue.
It matters.
I mean, this is a huge issue in 2020. This is a huge issue in 2020 because we had outside money coming in to help election officials, election clerks, in municipalities across the state. So 200 municipalities, that's your cities, your towns, your villages, they were receiving money.
These are the so-called Zucker bucks, some have called them.
Critics have called them, right? Conservatives have called it Zucker
yes.
bucks. But what it was this money came in, and pretty much if you asked for this grant, the Center for Tech and Civic Life gave the grants. 200 municipalities received it in Wisconsin. Most of the money, and this is where conservatives get upset, is most of the money went to the 5 largest cities: Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha. And why is it called Zuckerbucks? Because Mark Zuckerberg helped fund this organization, the Center for...
Founder of Facebook.
Right, the founder of Facebook. So that's why they call it Zuckerbucks. And what was this money used for in municipalities across the state? Well, some of it was hand sanitizer, plexiglass barriers that were used at the polling places. Milwaukee used it to buy drop boxes to use for absentee ballots back in 2020. So it was used for a number of reasons across the state. But conservatives took issue with that because it was coming from what was perceived to be liberal folks, liberal groups that were donating, and they thought that somehow this was being used. That just the optics of it. They took issue with the optics of it, and so now today the question on your ballot is: should the Constitution be created to provide that private donations and grants may not be applied for, accepted, expended, or used in connection with the conduct of any primary election or referendum?
Whew.
Let me say that again. Woo.
Can you say it shorter?
Yes. Yeah. What it means is, if you vote yes tonight on this referendum question I just read to you, which you have to read 3 or 4 times, question 1 is, in layman's terms, if I could please, should the state constitution ban outside grants coming to help with Wisconsin elections? the administration of elections.
Why couldn't they just write that?
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's funny because
like I'm being like quippy here, but it's also kind of a serious question.
Yeah, like if you don't want outside groups to help pay for elections, vote yes. If you do, vote no. That is easy to understand. Yeah. Even if you don't know the politics behind it, at least you get what that means, and that's what it means, right?
Exactly. That's what question 1 has to deal with.
Okay, what about question 2?
Question 2, I won't read you the legalese.
Read the legalese and then translate.
So I am reading from a text, so let me read this to you. And I'm actually skipping the part, but maybe I shouldn't skip the part, but there's...
Jason, read it in its entirety. Okay. Let's hear it in all of its jargon glory.
Okay. Question number 2. Shall Section 7(2) of Article 3 of the Constitution be created to provide that only election officials designated by law may perform tasks in the conduct of primaries, elections, and referendums?
It's a little more English, but I'm still not quite sure what it's saying, so give us the layman's breakdown.
The layman's breakdown is pretty much, should people that are not election officials, your clerk, deputy clerk, et cetera, in each of your cities, villages, municipalities, should people that are not election officials be able to administer elections in Wisconsin? That's what the question is. If you vote, if you want to ban that practice, then your yes vote means only election officials can administer. That's what the state constitution will be changed and amended to say if you vote yes on that tonight. If you vote no, then it would allow others who are not election officials. The constitution would not be changed, and so therefore it wouldn't say that these other folks.
So when you say administer elections, what does that mean? Like, what's the current practice now, and how often is it happening that someone was clearly concerned enough about it that they're proposing changing it?
Right. So right now in the state of Wisconsin, by law, it's the clerks that are administering the elections in your local village, town, city. So they're the ones who are, what is administer elections? It's, they're sending out the absentee ballots. They're getting the polling locations set up. They are having the what we call the poll workers, pretty much in layman's terms. They get all those people trained and set up, and just pretty much the logistics of running an election, which takes pretty much a lot of time to put into setting up for the election, getting ready, setting up the absentee ballots, making sure there's no printing errors on the ballots, things like that before they're sent out. Those things are handled by election clerks and their staff. The reason why this was an issue for conservatives was what we saw from open records requests out of Green Bay in 2020, where there were some of these outside groups that were helping the city of Green Bay in the administration. What were they doing? That's really the question here, but at least they had access to help with the elections.
This is a matter of like carrying ballot boxes. What do we know what this was?
Green Bay at the time said it wasn't that the people had access, that pretty much the election officials, the clerks, the people that are by law, had custody always of the ballots in Green Bay. So if the question was these open records, the emails had the people from these outside groups talking about, we helped Milwaukee put together their guidelines for X topic on the playbook, so to speak, for how we're going to run this election.
What I've heard you say, though, and I think if you wanted the real shorthand, a lot of times voters want just tell me which side I'm on and where I'm going. If these were both ballot measures that were put on by conservatives, by I believe it's the assembly that actually passes these, correct?
No, it goes through the legislature.
I'm sorry, the legislature. Assembly and Senate does not go through the governor.
No,
this passes the legislature, which is controlled by Republicans in both houses. Mm-hmm. They put these measures out there. They want yes votes. If you blindly support conservatives, there's your yes. If you're blindly opposed, there's your no. Mm-hmm. It's really sometimes politically that simple, right?
That's right. I mean, so you've got the conservatives that want you to vote yes on these two amendments, and the others, the liberals and Democrats, say vote no tonight, which you got another hour and 20 minutes, I guess, to get to your polling place.
And I know it may sound like we've started off with the hyper-technical, super exciting stuff, right? But we've started off with the things that everyone is going to see on their ballot today. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's interesting when you look at them side by side. Basically, it's the degree to which you want, quote unquote, outside groups involved in the election process, the degree to which you think that is appropriate or helpful, whatever that may be. And it's something the average person probably doesn't think a whole lot about. And to me, it highlights the importance and all the nuance that goes into some of the research that's required, but realistically, the research not a lot of people are going to do ahead of going into the voting booth.
I want to address one other thing before we get on to all of these other races, because there's a lot of other stuff on the ballot. But we talked about the presidential primary, and if you did go to the booth and you haven't been paying a whole lot of attention, you didn't know there were presumptive nominees, you might have heard us say that and say, what are you talking about? There were 2 different people on the Democratic ballot, or there were 5 people listed in the Republican primary. So what do you mean they're already decided? Those names are there, but the parties have already ultimately said in these other states they've racked up enough delegates that they're going to. Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. Joe Biden is going to be the Democrat nominee, correct?
Correct, yes. But you still can have the opportunity today on the Republican side. There were a number of people that were still on the ballot who dropped out of the race. So they suspended their campaigns. They're not running for election. They didn't have ads up in Wisconsin. They didn't send you a mailer. They didn't knock on your doors urging you to vote for the names: Chris Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, and Nikki Haley. I don't think any of us got any mailings from any of them. No door knocks and no campaign ads. They've suspended their campaigns, but they're still on the ballot because they were running at the time when the ballot was solidified earlier.
There's one other option too, by the way.
Yes, there is.
Uninstructed delegates.
Let's
right?
talk about that.
Yeah, because I think that could be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and especially after what we saw in Michigan, where we saw a similar move from Democrats that were upset with President Biden over the handling of the Gaza-Israel war. And they urged people in Michigan to vote. In Michigan they call it uncommitted. Here in Wisconsin it's the same thing, but it's called uninstructed. It's this idea that it's almost a vote of protest against the names that are on the ballot, so you can vote uninstructed. And in Michigan, it was actually quite a number of people. 100,000 people in Michigan voted for, on the Democratic side, uninstructed, and they're actually projected in Michigan to win 2 delegates because they had so many 100,000 people in that state vote for, on the Democratic ticket, or the Democratic side, uninstructed. There is a similar move, but it probably won't be nearly 100,000 votes in Wisconsin. We're seeing people urge the same motivation, talking about Israel and Gaza, urging people on the Democratic side to vote uninstructed. So we've seen some liberal and progressive groups urging that vote tonight. So that's one of the things that we're watching as those polls, when they do close, to see how many people did vote in that protest way against the Democratic presumptive nominee Joe Biden, and how many people voted for, on the Republican side, that same vehicle uninstructed. In past elections, it's a very small amount of people that actually check uninstructed and vote that way for these presidential primaries.
One of the things I want to talk about is some of the other things. I'm just going to run down a bit of a highlight of the other things that are on the ballots all across the state. There are school board races in 62 school districts just in southeastern Wisconsin alone. That might be statewide, actually. I did some of these numbers. I think these are statewide numbers. 122 available seats. 207. No, this is just southeast Wisconsin. You're right. I was right the first time.
The note that you wrote says these are specific to southeast Wisconsin.
And that got cut off the top of my page. See, I wrote myself a great note and I didn't pay attention. So 62 school districts in southeastern Wisconsin, 122 available seats, 207 candidates for those seats. In the nonpartisan races, there are aldermanic seats, council members, village trustees, town supervisors, 163 of those races across the state of Wisconsin, or across southeastern Wisconsin. 52 county supervisor seats are up. 12 mayors in southeastern Wisconsin alone, including Kenosha, which we'll talk about, Jason, a little bit later. 5 judges, 2 village presidents, and a partridge in a pear tree. 1 city attorney, a city controller, a county controller, and a county executive. There are 240 open seats out of 182 total races there, 460 candidates.
It's a lot of numbers.
It is a lot of numbers. The point is there's a lot on the ballot just in southeastern Wisconsin. So depending on where you live, depending on what was on your ballot, you may have voted in 1 or 2 or a few of these races. But that's not all. We also have a ton of school referendums and a ton of other community referendums, which we'll be talking about. Obviously, the biggest school referendum is Milwaukee Public $252 million. That's a big one.
Well, and we like to talk about numbers. I think one thing that's going to be crucial for us to discuss tonight is the trend here, because we have nearly 100 school districts in Wisconsin that are asking voters for money. And it was interesting. I was around family over this past weekend in Pennsylvania, where the concept of a referendum is a different one. So my family had a lot of questions about that, because we don't deal with ballot measures there. And so explaining the process and everything that happens, they were very curious about it. They were like, wait, so every few years school districts are kind of in a position of uncertainty then? Like, how do they make long-term plans? How do they know? And it was like, well, that's actually an argument that some of the school districts are making right now regarding their state funding. So when you have so many school districts that are returning to voters, many of whom had ballot measures that failed the last time around, and now they're having to return again and say, okay, but will you give us the money this time? And for several, operating costs, right? Like, we need this just to continue our operations in our day-to-day activities.
Yeah, there are two different types. There's the we want to build a new, a football field or a new school, and that's a one-time cost. And then there's the we need to up the amount of money we have every year for operational costs. I'm seeing a lot of those.
Right. And so when you see that trend, it's interesting to kind of take the bird's eye view on that and go, okay, what's going on here? What does this look like 5 years ago versus 5 years from now? Last time around, when we were sitting here just about a month ago and discussing, or 2 months ago.
2 months ago, yeah, it was February.
April.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And we were talking about how Wisconsin went through a period, and actually, Brian, you came up with a great chart for this, went through a period where these referendums were getting passed, and they were getting passed, and they were getting passed, and then we recently saw a nosedive with that. And I think it's going to be really interesting.
Kayla, I've got that. Well, here we go. If you want to bring it up on my screen real quick, and I know we're waiting on Craig Gilbert to join us in a minute, so if he's there, let us know. But if you, is this, it doesn't look like my screen. No. All right. No, that's the wrong screen. Anyway, so what you were talking about is the pass rate had gotten up to 90% at one point.
Yeah. And that was in the year, what, 2018? That was 2018,
yeah.
Yeah.
And it stayed pretty high in 2020 and has been progressively dropping ever since. And just in February, there were only 10 in February, but of the 10 referendums, we could talk about that. 10 referendums, 4 of them passed, 6 failed. So that's a 40% pass rate. Now, that's a much smaller sample size. But the question is, as we look at these 91 that are on the ballot statewide today, what is that going to look like, and what will that say to other districts that are considering doing this maybe the next time around?
Right. And what's the sustainability of this model, right? Certainly there's an argument on one side that's, hey, we have school districts that need to be fiscally responsible, and we want it to be hard for you to go to the taxpayers to ask them for more money, right? We don't want it to just be an easy thing where suddenly now the burden of this is falling on the taxpayers. On the other hand, you have school districts saying, hey, wait a minute, we have a declining share of state revenue that's coming our way. We have increasing costs. We have more responsibilities that are falling on school districts. How on earth are we supposed to keep up if we don't keep going back to property taxpayers?
Cale, do you know, is Craig Gilbert, has he he's there? Okay, so we're going to come back to talking about school referendums, but we have the Chief Washington correspondent and just political journalist extraordinaire. I said I was going to use that word. Craig Gilbert is joining us. Craig, thank you. I believe you're actually in Milwaukee right now. Is that right?
I am in Milwaukee right now. It's great to be with you.
So presidential politics, I know, is something very close to your heart. And here we are in a pretty unusual year where it's a presidential primary in Wisconsin, and both major parties already know who their nominee is probably going to be. What does that do to what you're watching today?
Yeah, it makes it really difficult to interpret today's vote. I mean, to interpret the turnout, and also to interpret how people are voting. I mean, there's going to be some small percentage of people in both parties that don't vote for the presumptive nominee. And so people will be kind of looking at that to see if it means anything. I mean, practically, it doesn't mean a whole lot because we know who the nominees are going to be. But we're kind of reading the tea leaves here in a state that obviously is going to be at the epicenter of the November election.
When I look back at some of the recent elections in Wisconsin, the primary elections, going back to 2000, I looked back at the last 6 of these, and you try to get some idea what the numbers might mean. But it's pretty clear that the peak voting years are, for instance, for Democrats, it was the election of Barack Obama the first time around. Second time around, they hardly showed up because they all knew he was going to be the nominee. Similar thing happened with Republicans and George W. Bush. There was almost nobody who came to vote on the Republican side in 2004. I mean, comparatively speaking. So in the most active year was 2016 when we had uncertainty all around. Can you really read anything? What do you expect this year? Do you expect the turnout to be? I've got to imagine it's not going to rival 2016. But what are we looking at today?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be way down. I mean, certainly in past years we've had big judicial races in the spring, and that is enough in Wisconsin to bring out a lot of voters. I mean, the voters are pretty discerning here, and they need a reason to turn out. I mean, people are habitual voters in Wisconsin compared to other states. But as you alluded to, I mean, it really makes a difference, whether there's much at stake in your vote or not. And so whether it's a competitive and meaningful presidential primary, whether it's a high stakes judicial contest, those are things that bring voters out. There are some people that just will vote in every election, but that's not true of most people.
What is it about Wisconsin that you think makes people more habitual voters compared to other places?
I think part of it is cultural. I mean, I've looked at this over time. Wisconsin is a state that is perennially among the top 5 or 6 in turnout. Sometimes it's 1 or 2. And so there's a cultural aspect. Like I said, it's a matter of habit and tradition. I also think, in some ways, Wisconsin has had rules that encourage voting. For example, early voting, but also same-day registration, election day registration is a big deal in Wisconsin. The states that have that allow you to register on election day traditionally and typically have higher turnout. And of course, Wisconsin is a battleground state. So the fact that people understand their state that matters, their vote matters, and the outcome is in doubt is pretty motivating for people.
What do you make of former President Donald Trump today campaigning in Green Bay? Talk about the Bow counties. Talk about what's at stake in the first campaign event for the former president going right to Green Bay today.
Yeah, not a shock that even though the nomination is in hand for Donald Trump, he's coming to Wisconsin and, appearing here on the day of our primary, given the stakes. And we've seen Joe Biden here, of course. We're going to see both of them here a lot. I mean, Wisconsin is one of probably just 6 states that will decide the presidential election. Green Bay is a strategic area. Green Bay is, one of the 3 big media markets in Wisconsin. And it's the area right around Green Bay is quite purple. The region is kind of red as you get farther from Green Bay into northeastern and northern Wisconsin. So that is a pretty good region for Donald Trump, especially the more rural parts of the Green Bay region. But the area right around Green Bay and Appleton, the more urban and inner suburban parts, are a real battleground that really, really matters when you look at the statewide vote. It will have a lot to do with who ends up on top and who ends up winning Wisconsin's electoral votes in November.
Which parts of the Milwaukee market do you think will be most significant? I think I remember last time around, was it Cedarburg where it went to Biden by, it was like 18 votes or 20 votes or something like that? It was really split in a way that felt different than the way Cedarburg had gone in the past.
Yeah, I think the drama in the WOW counties, the suburban counties outside Milwaukee, is that they were once so red and that they were perennially the 3 most Republican counties in Wisconsin. We're talking about Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. They were once so red, and now they're less red. And Ozaukee, of the 3, is the one that has become the most purple, and that's where Cedarburg is, and that's why it's, from a historical perspective, it's kind of shocking to see any communities in any of these counties not won by Republicans. And so it's really going to matter whether, I mean, I think it's the Republicans have the challenge. They have to sort of stop the erosion in the WOW counties. This has been such an important part of their path to victory, in statewide victory in Wisconsin, the vote they get out of these counties. They're populous counties, but the margins aren't as big in the Trump era as they used to be. And so I think it's one of the goals and certainly challenges for Republicans in this election is kind of steadying the ship in these suburban counties. Again, it's been a real challenge in the Trump era because Donald Trump's politics and his rhetoric and his style and his persona have not played as well with suburban Republicans and suburban swing voters as they have in more rural parts of the state.
Any theories about what's contributing to that purpleization?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different things. I mean, there's some demographic change in some of these counties. I mean, you've got, some shift and churn in the electorate. It's also the case that, there are some long-term, national trends occurring here that are coming a little bit late to Wisconsin. But, there has been a trend in inner suburbs and more densely populated suburbs away from the Republican Party across the country. It's happening a little bit later in the Milwaukee suburbs than it's happened around some other cities. We see kind of a divide between more densely populated places and less densely populated places. And so in the Milwaukee metropolitan area, you still see on the periphery of metropolitan Milwaukee, in some of these exurbs and small towns, you still see a lot of strength for Donald Trump. But as you get closer to Milwaukee County, as you get to places like Cedarburg and Brookfield and Pewaukee, and Menominee Falls, the Republican margins are not as big as they used to be. I think abortion is an issue for some voters. There's an education divide. And so some of these communities where you have a higher share of college-educated voters, those voters have moved toward the Democratic Party, just as, blue-collar voters and non-college voters have moved toward the Republican Party.
One question on this, Craig, though, is Reuters had a piece this morning where they talked about, they were in Milwaukee and they showed a center that's opened up that is run by African Americans who are targeting African Americans in Milwaukee and saying they want to bring them over to the Republican side. We actually had Professor Christopher Devine on our podcast, Open Record, from University of Dayton, who's done research on campaign visits. And one of the things he talked about was, when campaign visits actually work, if you look at the data, it's when candidates go to places that are typically not necessarily friendly territory, although they tend to gravitate to friendly zones. When they go to places that are more competitive or places where they actually don't historically do well, they actually have a better shot at swaying some voters and turning some people on their way. Is that, for Donald Trump and for Republicans, is that what they need to do? Do they need to be going into places like Milwaukee, maybe going into Dane County and trying to swing people as opposed to going to traditionally friendly territory?
Yeah, I think that is potentially helpful. I mean, one reason it's helpful is that you don't need to win those areas. If you're a Republican, you're not going to win Milwaukee or Madison, but you don't need to. You just need to reduce your deficit. I mean, if you need to lose them by, 60 points instead of 65 points, every vote matters. One vote matters as much as another vote. It's sort of like on the Democratic side, Democrats competing harder in small towns, in rural counties. I mean, you used to see that more in the 2000s. I would follow John Kerry and Al Gore around on the campaign trail. They spent a lot of time in western Wisconsin. They spent a lot of time in small towns. And it paid off. Now, it's harder to do that if you're a Democrat today because of voting shifts. But again, it's the parallel on the Republican side of, there's a lot of evidence in the polling that the margins are softer for Democrats in some of these communities among voters of color than they have been in the past. And again, some of them, we're talking about such lopsided margins that, it's a matter of just cutting into those margins. Just like it would be very helpful for Republicans, to lose Dane County by 65 points instead of 70 points. It's a big area. It's a growing area. And so that is, kind of part of the formula of winning elections is just, shoring up your weaknesses even just a little bit.
And you talked about Dane County there. I mean, can you talk about the spike in voters in Dane County? I mean, they're continuing to vote heavily blue, but just the number of voters there has really surged in recent years. Is there any way that Republicans can break through in Dane County, and how important is the vote there for the Democrats to continue to enlarge that growing population of Dane County?
Yeah, so I mean, one way to think about this is that Wisconsin, is a very kind of blue-collar white state compared to other battlegrounds. And demographically, that's been very helpful to the Republican Party. And we've seen in the Trump era, big Republican gains in that part of the electorate. So you might have expected Wisconsin, as a result, to kind of drift toward being a red state based on those kind of national kind of demographic trends. But one reason that hasn't happened is because the highest growth area of the state is the area around Madison. And so you not only have more and more voters in the Dane County area, but they are bluer than ever. And so the numbers and the way the math works is they're kind of adding to the Democratic totals a little bit more in every election cycle, which makes it, tougher and tougher for Republicans. And I think it's one reason why, in the quote Trump era, Republicans have had kind of a lower ceiling. They've had trouble getting much more than 50% of the vote, which was less of a problem, during the Obama presidency, when you saw Scott Walker winning by 5 or 6 or 7 points, Ron Johnson winning some of his races by 5 or 6 points. That is not happening in the last 5 or 6 years. So the Dane County difference is one reason, and the erosion in the Milwaukee suburbs is another reason.
One last question for you. Is there anything for this election that you think has not gotten enough attention or not gotten enough discussion?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that some things are going to happen between now and Election Day that none of us are counting on. And when you have a state on a knife's edge and an election on a knife's edge, there's all sorts of X factors that could be decisive. And we know that, and this is, again, a lot of attention is being paid to Donald Trump's court issues. That's one X factor. An issue like abortion is another X factor. What's happening around the world, and upheaval is another X factor. Two older candidates, how they perform on the campaign trail, those are X factors. So all of these things are potential, game changers, even if they just make a marginal difference in the election. We don't know exactly how. I mean, by definition, these are wild cards, and so it makes it very difficult to predict, who's going to come out on top in Wisconsin when the state is so close, and when there's so much sort of uncertainty about events and about the candidates.
Craig, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've got a lot going on, so we appreciate you spending time with us here on our Fox 6 live stream, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. Have a great election night. All
right. Thanks, Craig. Craig Gilbert, the Lubar Fellow at Marquette University Law School and a recently retired Washington bureau chief for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, longtime national political reporter, obviously very knowledgeable about presidential politics and about how they impact the state of Wisconsin. It's just so interesting, though. I come away from that still not really knowing what to look for tonight.
I don't think
what can we read out of these numbers?
I mean, the message I got, especially from that last point, is be skeptical of anyone who's making predictions with strong degrees of certainty, right? Because, and especially with this kind of anticlimactic feel when it comes to the presidential race, there's so much we don't know that's going to unfold. I actually think the highest drama things tonight are going to be the hyper-local issues that appear on people's ballots.
And we were talking about that just before Craig came on. I mean, the school referendums all across the state, but the biggest one, of course, city of Milwaukee, the Milwaukee public school system, that is a $252 million referendum. I know we have a story that, Jason, you did on that just here in the past week. I don't know if that one's ready to go, but do we want to go to that first and then maybe talk about it a little bit after that? Once Cale gets this racked up here, I think I probably took things out of order, but I think we can watch that story, give us the foundation for what's going on with that, and then talk about it. It's dollar-wise certainly the biggest one. It's not the only one. I know you've done stories on others.
Yeah, we've looked at them across the state. You know, there's 91 of these school referendums, which are using referendums now, but they're on the ballot.
I did research that, by the way.
I did too. And I want to apologize to everybody that was listening to us last time in February when I defended.
You said apparently referenda is a butchering of the Latin language.
Yeah, which is an opposite of what I said back in February when I said, well, the Latin says we need to, the purity of the Latin is referenda. Well, I'm sorry, folks. I'll admit that I made a mistake.
We were just talking about being skeptical of certainty.
It's not that that's not plural for referendum. It is an option according to Merriam-Webster, but in terms of its use in the way we're talking about election issues, the Associated Press, which probably guides most journalists, says it's referendums. Cambridge University, Oxford University, they all say referendums is preferable, at least 4-1. So I'm going to go with referendums. That's why if you hear us saying that tonight, referendums, but sometimes the Latin still kicks in.
If you're a political nerd and a grammar nerd, have we got the live stream for you?
Man,
and I would love to have somebody that's like a Latin expert, political expert, call in to the show tonight. So if you're a professor at one of the local universities,
we are going to boost ratings off the charts with this one. Let's get a Latin expert.
Okay, we got the thumbs up on that video.
Okay, let's listen to this story Jason did on the MPS referendum.
Milwaukee voters will decide whether to give Milwaukee Public Schools an extra $252 million a year.
I don't think that many of us know a real plan of how these resources, $250 million, are going to be employed and deployed at MPS.
The Greater Milwaukee Committee says it cannot support the referendum, saying there was a lack of transparency. The group's made of 200 leaders from corporations, nonprofits, and education.
It was announced just a few days before Christmas. It was approved by the board a few days into the new year and kind of hastily put on the ballot in April.
The teachers union, the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, says kids cannot wait.
There actually is no time for students. What will happen is this fall, if the referendum does not pass, children will lose access to teachers, to valued paraprofessionals and other support staff.
Milwaukee Public Schools says they're expecting a $200 million budget deficit.
If it doesn't pass, we are facing our significant cuts to schools, about a 13% cut to all of our school budgets.
Democratic lawmakers backing this referendum blame state lawmakers for not sending enough money to schools.
If state funding for Milwaukee Public Schools had kept pace with inflation over the last 15 years, the district would be receiving an additional $210 million.
But the GMC says this referendum doesn't lay out how it's going to boost learning outcomes.
We all can agree that the outcomes today are unacceptable.
Okay, so that's the background of this referendum, but I thought it was interesting today. We had Zoe Chapala reporting in the morning news about this, and then she sent out an email with a breakdown of some of the things that MPS has presented in terms of how they do plan to spend this money and where it's going to go. And even that still leaves questions. I think there are a lot of questions about what some of this means. What did you take away when you saw some of that breakdown, Amanda?
Well, one of the things Jason and I were discussing earlier in the day was the portion that goes to increase costs of salaries and wages. So they said $96 million. And actually the quote here from their public relations employee is, MPS has made significant progress in hiring and retaining new staff, even in the wake of a national teacher shortage. Like other districts, MPS is working to keep salaries competitive for the region. So Jason and I were discussing this, and we said, okay, and they go through the decreased revenue limit, they go through the increased construction levy, benefits, things like medical costs, things like that, supplies
Inflation,
and materials,
right.
debt service, all these other things. They're talking about pension things. But when it comes to the salaries, my main question reading that was, okay, so are these salaries they've already committed to paying? You know, are these people they have hired, and now in order to continue going at the salary that they were promised, we need this referendum? You know, were these people who have been promised something that at the time the money wasn't there for? And I know, Jason, you dug into that a little bit this afternoon and this morning.
So what we found out was that the school board back in January, when they set their budget priorities, had agreed to these pay raises back in January. And now in the referendum, they're saying that they need additional money. So when we have these referendum in Wisconsin, it's the question is, shall you raise your property taxes to give these schools more money?
And to be clear, these are cost of living raises, right?
Right. So in Wisconsin, the unions the teachers unions can negotiate contracts up to the rate of inflation. So that's the limit. You can't go above the cost of inflation. So these would be what they call cost of living increases for the teacher staff. I mean, it's everybody that works for MPS, the janitors, teachers, principals, etc. And so when we asked MPS, we've been going back and forth with them over email. They had a bullet list of things that they were going to be using this $252 million for. And one of the bullets just said this: increased costs of salaries and other wages. It didn't talk about, it just pretty much said a pay raise for the teachers. We're like, wow, the largest chunk of this referendum is going to go to pay raises. So we went back and forth with MPS today, like, what does that mean? That you're giving all the money to pay raises. So they said, actually, of that $92 million, about 20% was going to be going to pay raises, and the other was to keep faculty, to keep the staff that they've already hired on, to keep them in place.
So they don't make cuts.
So yeah, back in 2020, there was the last referendum from Milwaukee Public Schools, and with that money, they were able to add arts and also music programs in schools across the district. And they're saying without this extra money, those new additional teachers that they brought on after the 2020 referendum might have to be cut. They're proposing potentially 13% budget cuts at every single school across the district, and they're saying they're having a $200 million budget deficit. So that's what they're saying is going on. They need this extra money to keep those faculty staff that they've already brought on board, but also then to give everybody these pay raises to keep up with 4% inflation.
So, I want to ask one question on that, but because you said that they set these priorities at their January meeting. My understanding is, and I know the business groups that have come out in opposition to the referendum said that the referendum just came up as a topic in December. So they started talking about the referendum and then raised the salaries? Is that the order in which this happened?
That's my understanding, is that the referendum was brought up back and voted, introduced in December.
Is that where some of the criticism comes from for the business group? You talked about a referendum, went and raised the salaries and said, now we need that money or else we're going to have to make cuts.
Right.
And to be clear, that's not the only thing
no, right,
that
but
the
I'm saying,
money
is
would
that
go
what
toward.
Is that what the critics are saying? Is that what they're looking at? Is that sort of timing of the way that came
They were upset with the timing. So, I mean, just compare 2024's referendum with 2020. In 2020, there was no organized opposition. This go around, there was organized opposition from not one but two different groups that actually registered with the city. They have to file campaign finance disclosures and all of that. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars from MMAC, the Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce here in Milwaukee. And they came out opposed, and they ran television ads and all of that. And also the teachers union for it, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars as well, which we can break those numbers down a little bit later because they have a month or so to get those final reports in. We're going to dissect and look at where that money went, what the money was used for both sides in this referendum. But again, it's on your ballot today, and it would raise your taxes. If you have a $200,000 home assessed value here in Milwaukee, the taxes would go up about $400 a year.
Now, speaking of this referendum, I believe we have Ashley Sears, Fox 6's Ashley Sears, who is joining us live now. And I know, Ashley, tonight at 8 o'clock, I believe there's going to be a news conference related to all of this. Tell us what you expect and what we might learn from that.
Oop, Ashley, I think you're muted.
$2024. I'm just learning Zoom, guys. Sorry about that.
Flashback to 2020.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. So bear with me here. Sorry. we're outside of the MTEA offices, the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association. Normally we'd be, at an event or something like that, but we are waiting right now for a press conference. It starts at 8:00. The teachers union, well, actually the doors open at 8, I should say. The teachers union will be holding this press conference in regards to this referendum, win or lose. So we're just kind of waiting to see what they have to say at the end of the day here. I was kind of listening into what Jason was saying there, but yeah, this was a big driver to the polls. I listened to some of Bill Miston, some of his, I guess, story earlier today, and he talked to a lot of voters, and they said this is what really got them out to the polls today. It's raining, it's pretty bad weather, but they wanted to put in their 2 cents with this. But there was this big push for people to vote yes on this referendum, and as Jason was saying, if this passes, if your home is assessed at $100,000, you could expect to be paying about $216 more a year. And MPS says this is needed because state funding hasn't kept up with inflation and there's declining enrollment. And the district is facing a $200 million budget shortfall for the 2024-25 school year. MPS says a majority of that $252 million would go to teacher salaries and benefits for staff. We're told $33 million would allow MPS to update textbooks and online learning. And groups opposed said that there was a lack of transparency with this referendum, and they couldn't justify an investment with the current academic standings. So in 2020, voters were asked to approve an $87 million referendum, and that went through. If this doesn't pass today, MPS warned about significant cuts. They said about 13% of all the school budgets would see these cuts, and it's just what voters said, that they were out at the polls today because they wanted to have their voices heard. So we'll see what they have to say.
Ashley, I don't know if you've been talking to voters at all. Have you been at any of the polling places? I know you said you watched Bill's story earlier.
No, we haven't been to any of the polling places today. We've just come out here to kind of get this news conference. We're just kind of waiting. I'm
curious, you mentioned the $87 million referendum, and Amanda, you talked earlier about how there are some school districts that are going back after failed referendums. This is actually a case where Milwaukee Public Schools succeeded with a referendum, and now they're coming back and saying it's still not nearly enough because of the lack of state funding and revenue limits. I am curious to find out if voters who are going to the polls, if they're saying, gosh, enough, it's enough, inflation, or are they saying this is too important and we've got to do this for the kids? I really would be curious to hear how that goes. You're going to hear how teachers feel about this, obviously, in a little bit. Have you gotten any sort of an advanced idea of, is this just a matter of they're waiting to see how it turns out and they're going to talk about it one way or the other? Or have they given any indications about anything else you're going to hear?
Yeah, it's my understanding they're going to talk about it one way or the other, because if this doesn't pass, I'm sure they want to get out there ahead of this and say, now this is what happens next. These are the cuts we're going to see, and this is how we move forward. And if it does, I'm sure there's a lot of, gratitude of like, now we can move ahead with this, and here's how we're going to put forth some of this money.
So you're just stuck in the car until then, huh? It's not the most glamorous election night of all time, I'm guessing. You've probably been in some better situations.
So many years I was like, I don't have anything to show this year. I like to usually show the table with the food and, like the big setup with the stage. And I'm like, instead, here I am. This is Hector. So
hey, Hector.
He's just trying to be quiet next to me as I'm like babbling on. So, and it's just...
Ashley,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
You've been a reporter in this market for several years. I'm curious, over the years, as you've gone out and you've done your reporting involving MPS, have you seen anything from parents, from voters, from taxpayers, where you have kind of that referendum fatigue? Or do you see the motivating factor being, hey, it's for the kids, we got to do what we can for the kids? Because I know over the years, I've certainly heard from both sides of that argument. I'd imagine you have too.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that, people have strong opinions on. A lot of people are saying, we can't just keep throwing money at this issue. And others are saying, we have to help these kids and we have to make the schools better. So I think it's definitely, there's some division there, and it should be interesting to see how this all kind of pans out at the end of the day.
People will often ask, what do you think is going to happen? Do you have any indication of how, how voters feel about this? And it's it seems like, I don't make predictions on this at all, but in yard signs don't vote. That's all we always like. Okay, well, what are the yard signs saying? But the yard signs don't vote, but there hasn't been. I haven't seen when I drive through Milwaukee, I just haven't seen on either side. And I know both sides have been giving out free yard signs, and it's not like I'm seeing a swell of people in the neighborhoods of Milwaukee saying one way or the other how they want their neighbors to vote on this issue. Now, of course, they are, talking on our social media and things like that, but I just don't see on either side this excitement to share their thoughts on this particular referendum. I don't know if that's because of the fatigue or not.
Or part of it might be how quickly this
came
about.
I think that's a really big piece of this, is it came on so quickly that there hasn't been time to grow that groundswell from either side, really, right?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly this is us sitting here talking about theories, right? That's all you can do when you're waiting for a press conference and when you don't know how it's going to turn out.
That's what 2.5-hour live streams are for, is sitting here talking about theories, okay?
I have a question for Jason, actually. I'm curious. I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff on social media. I saw like Mandela Barnes posting vote yes. We've seen David Crowley come out in favor of this, Cavalier Johnson. How much do you think that kind of factors into average everyday voters who may support these leaders but may or may not support this referendum?
Yeah, and that's the other thing I was wrestling with is with the Greater Milwaukee Committee coming out in the Chamber of Commerce coming out opposed to the referendum. Like, do those messages resonate with people? Are people, like, oh, well, the Greater Milwaukee Committee, which is made up of, as I mentioned in my story, made up of all these nonprofits, educational leaders, and also corporations. So it's sort of a combination of business, education, and nonprofit.
Yeah. Do most people even know what that is?
Do people, okay, well, if they have a thought on this, I better, maybe I should listen in on what they said and follow their lead. I don't know when, Mandela Barnes and the mayor and the county exec come out for it, that got that one night of story on air for sure. We covered Mandela Barnes, and we also covered the opponents the same day. What do people make of that? I mean, does that resonate with people? I guess we're going to find out in a little bit of time. But I just don't know that these organizations coming out, they did spend a lot of money, like we did see with the chamber as well as the teachers unions. The Vote Yes folks, I should say. They were on TV with ads. I mean, they had that since January, right, to put up the ads and whatnot. But are those ads going to convince people to vote one way or the other? I don't know. We're still going to.
Well, I know a few weeks ago, Stephanie Quirk did a couple stories where she zeroed in on some of this. And it's interesting to hear the different ways people talk about it. So, and I remember looking at her script for this because the big talking point MPS was using was, oh, well, for the average voter who owns, a property of X value, it's going to be a little more than 50 cents a day. Okay, well, then you bring in the stat about what it's going to cost, a little more than $200 a year for a $100,000 house. Okay, now for a $200,000 house. And when Stephanie went out and talked to people, she talked to one woman who said, look, I'm a senior citizen. I'm on a fixed income. And when you start talking about those bigger and bigger numbers, and when you're talking about, let's say you own a $200,000 house and it's going to cost you an additional $400+ a year, that's a lot for someone on a fixed income, no matter how much they want to help the kids.
I think it goes beyond that, too. And I think it's maybe why some of the business groups have come out against it, is because a lot of people in the city of Milwaukee don't own a home. So you might hear that and go, well, I don't own a $200,000 house. I'm fine. But your landlord does. And if your landlord owns a lot of properties, what are they going to do? What every corporation does, they pass along the cost to their consumer. That means rent could go up. And so we've heard some talk of, well, maybe you don't own a home, but that's another possibility for people who are just barely getting by and saying, I can't afford an increase in rent. Your rent could go up. Yeah. If your landlord's costs go up, yours might too. So that's another potential concern.
It's the fact of the matter is that when you look at data on homeowner or property renters in Milwaukee, I think it's like 50% of renters in Milwaukee are what's considered rent burdened, which is a fancy word that economists use, but it means that they're spending more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. And economists like to see that number below 30%, and about 50% of the city is above that threshold, which means they're not able to have the money to save for a down payment to buy their own home or things like that. And it shows from the federal perspective of rent burden, cost burden, that they're really strapped to the point to where they're going over the comfort level with what they're spending on housing. So is that going to impact people now when they're dealing with inflation and we saw the prices rise over the last few years? Is that going to lead people to vote no tonight? These are all of the pressing questions that voters are wrestling with tonight, and that's why I think this particular element on your ballot tonight is what I'm most going to be surprised with, one way or the other, whether it passes or fails. I'm going to be surprised. I have no clue how people are going to vote.
I want to point out one thing, by the way. Ashley's sitting here listening so patiently as she sits in the car with Hector, and he's got to be quiet. What my favorite part about this was Ashley comes on our live stream for us to ask her questions, and she's such a reporter. She's like, Jason, I've got a question for you. And she turned this into an interview of us, and here we are talking, and Ashley just gets to listen.
Expert, so
that's outstanding. Ashley, thank you so much for taking some time to join us here, and we look forward to hearing your reports later on, both on Fox 6 News on the air and whether or not we have a chance to bring you back here on the live stream. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So, the MPS referendum, obviously a huge issue. It's not the only one. There are some other big ones. You talked about Mequon, I think, has $100 and some million referendum. That's not operations, though, right?
$102 million.
$102 million. I believe that is for
construction
buildings. For buildings, right?
So we actually have a story that we produced on that particular issue. I went out with Myron Jacobs, one of our photojournalists here, and we talked with voters. We also talked with the superintendent there just to find out exactly what this $102 million would be used for. So here, take a listen.
It's not only the snow that's weighing on Maria Carrillo.
Some points I'm against it and some points I'm for it.
She's struggling to vote yes or no on a $102 million Mequon school district referendum.
An investment in your schools is an investment in your community.
The $102 million would tear down the current Parkview Middle School. It's now 70 years old. The district would then build a replacement, adding 6th graders to the current 7th and 8th.
To enhance the educational opportunities for our students, and then to replace an aging building that is going to require a lot of investment in order to keep it running.
The district shared these photos of crowded hallways, full classrooms, and corroded pipes.
The cost to renovate and add 6th grade and get the building up to standard was about $85 million.
The new school would add space for science, tech, gym, and music. The superintendent says the 6th graders out of the elementary schools would then free up room for more 4-year-olds, which right now has a waiting list of about 75 kids.
We opened it up at 8 a.m. For our full-day seats, they were filled by 8:12.
Wow. This former teacher, though, isn't sure what to do.
I've been living here for 24 years, and my taxes have gone up and up and up and up, and there's no break.
Soon, she'll have to decide.
Back in the middle. I think it's because I'm not rich and I'm not poor. I'm in the middle.
And that just gets at what we're talking about. That just gets at what we're talking about with this struggling to figure out what's going to happen with voters tonight. How are they going to? They're struggling themselves on voting yes or no. They like her. She was a former teacher. She has an appreciation for the public schools in Mequon, but at the same time, she's struggling with her bills. So what is she going to do? I don't know. She struggled throughout that entire interview trying to figure out pros and cons of her vote.
You could hear her weighing it.
Yeah, totally weighing it. And that's why when I said I don't know how voters in Milwaukee, it's the same issue. You know, we're hearing that when Bill talked with voters today. Yes, I got to vote for schools, even if it means a sacrifice for me. You heard that from people, but at the same time, well, it's too much right now. I just can't afford it.
I just wonder, though, like in a case where you can say, here's a building we're going to build, something the kids might need or could benefit, there's something tangible. Mm-hmm. When the Brewers wanted money, they said, look at the condition of these things, and we need to replace these things. If
in
MPS,
that story, you see the pipes,
You
right?
see the pipes, right? But if MPS is talking about sort of generally, this is for the kids, that's different than saying this school's art program is going to close. Mm-hmm. And they never got that specific. And I wonder if that ends up in the long run actually hurting them, because it's much easier to rally behind something if you go, I can't see my kid's music program go away, I'll pay anything, versus, well, in general, some things might get cut and I don't know what they are. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I also think, the reality, they always say it's the economy's stupid, right? If inflation is, if people are still feeling that, if they're going to the grocery store and things are high, are they just going to be in the mood statewide to pass more taxes for themselves? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
One thing I haven't seen pop up in at least the school referendums we've been following closely in Southeast Wisconsin, but they have popped up in the public safety referendums, is ARPA. And so
Yeah.
when you had this influx of money from the
American Rescue
yes,
Plan.
thank you. My
Yep.
brain was not functioning. When COVID first hit, one of the questions, and actually one of the things we were talking about when we were sitting here a couple months ago, was, okay, you start these things with this ARPA money. What happens when that money goes away? And so for the public safety referendums, one in Cedarburg, one in Port Washington, some of that money goes to keeping some of those ARPA positions. And I do wonder with school districts when we're going to start hearing those conversations pop up about, okay, well, we started this thing through ARPA and we really want to keep it. How are we going to do that now?
Well, I'll tell you, as a journalist for as long as I have been, for 30 years, and you go to budget meetings, and I always remember the old adage that when government creates something, it never goes away without it being called a cut. So you create something new, you say, we're going to have it for a year because it would be great. And if you don't have it next year, look at the things we're slashing. So when ARPA helped school districts go, we can do new things, that's always the question. Are these, and I heard a lot of people who are really watching budgets closely say, okay, this is a new thing. Is this one we're going to have to keep paying for later? And if so, how are we going to do it then? Because this money is temporary. You're right. I think that's going to come up more and more. Now, we haven't talked about some of the non-school things, and there are referendums we'll talk about, fire and EMS, but also we mentioned a lot of the nonpartisan races, county supervisors, city aldermen, trustees, and so on. City of Milwaukee has a few elections for alderperson 3 who are not returning, and including a couple of longtime city aldermen. Michael Murphy, who we spoke to in February, we had him on live. After 9 terms, he is stepping down from the Common Council in Milwaukee. And Mark Borkowski, who has been a county supervisor for many years and now a city alderman for a number of years, he's decided it's time to go. Earlier this week, actually yesterday, I had a chance to talk to Alderman Borkowski about stepping down, why now was the time, and what's next for him. And we'll play that now, and you can hear what he had to say. So Alderman Mark Borkowski, longtime Milwaukee alderman, retiring from the Milwaukee Common Council, but not just longtime Milwaukee alderman, also a longtime member of the County Board of Supervisors. You spent a lot of time in public service. Why is now the time? Why did you decide this was the time to step down?
Well, if these terms were maybe a year or 2 years, I could probably do it. But a 4-year commitment, in my eyes, was too long. And it's just such a perfect natural break. Why put people through a special election? This is the time. And so it has to end, sometime. So as sad as it is, it's time for me to go.
We've talked a lot about the turnover on the Common Council. And if you look back just to before the pandemic, just before the 2020 election, to what's going to happen after this election on Tuesday, there will only be 4 members left on the Common Council who were there prior to 2020. That's an enormous amount of turnover. Can you talk a little bit about how the makeup of the council has changed just in the brief time you've been there?
Well, just by ages. And I think that when you look at Mayor Cavalier Johnson, he's like 37 years old. I was the second oldest. Michael Murphy's the third oldest. And so we've got a couple of people in their 50s, but the majority of my colleagues are in their 30s or 40s. So when you look at it that way and you look at Mayor Johnson's age, this is the new regime. This is the new generation of leaders.
And some would say the fresh faces are good. Is there also another side to that, the loss of institutional knowledge? I think of how long Alderman Murphy's been on this council. Of course, you've been around city and county politics for a very long time. What does it mean when you lose that kind of institutional knowledge on the council?
Well, Michael Murphy is a legend, and his footprint and his fingerprints are everywhere in the city over the last 34 plus years. And so I'd like to think that besides Michael and myself, that people have learned a few things. It's all about growing up. And it's like when we're in school and we're in grade school and then we're in high school. You follow your leaders, you follow your peers. And that's what's going on here. It's a natural progression. And it's new energy, it's new enthusiasm. And so the bottom line is that the city is going to be in a good place.
Is the partisan makeup changing? I mean, you've been for a long time one of the more conservative, if not the most conservative voices on the county board of supervisors and now on the common council. Is that changing as well? Do you see that shifting?
I do. Yeah, there's less and less of, I hate to use labels as far as conservative or liberal, but when I look at my aldermanic district, yes, it trends conservative. And as an alderman or an alder person, you have to represent your constituents or your bosses as they are. And it's not so much what you want to do, but it's how you represent them. And, you know, the 11th, which is my district, the 13th, which is by the airport, Scott Spiker does not have opposition. He will still have his district that skews conservative, but again, it's trending that way where the conservative districts are becoming less and less.
Well, you talk about representing your district. If you look at the city as a whole, it is a majority-minority city. And the council has now become, and certainly will be going forward, a majority-minority council. Is that a good thing?
That's the way the trend of the city is, and it has to be a good thing. Absolutely. And so, you know, we're in a new era. I was elected in 1992, Brian, and so all of your viewers, you can kind of think back and say, okay, where were you in 92? That's a long time ago. And you know what? Things do not stay stagnant. They move forward. And so this is what's good for the city. This is what's happening in the city. And it's just the regular and normal trend.
What is, if you look back, what are one of the two most important issues you think you've been a part of weighing in on, or things that you've gotten done for the community, whether that's on the Common Council or for Milwaukee County?
Well, I have been all about accountability, and because I firmly believe in it, and I'm held accountable as I should be. But at both the county level and the city level, I made it my mission to hold department heads accountable. Nobody gets a pass. And I think some people may forget that, you know, we're here to work for the taxpayer. They are our bosses, not the mayor. We take our direction from our constituency. And I expect a lot from myself, as my constituents expect a lot from me. And it's only fair and natural that that accountability should be weighed equitably throughout the departments, including the county executive, including the mayor. And so I know I've ruffled some feathers because, you know, I've held some feet to the fire, but that's my job. And I'm not here to basically say, you know, because you're the mayor or because you're the county executive, whatever you say goes. That's not the case. And my constituents, I think, have appreciated, you know, that side of me.
Do you think there's someone who will carry that mantle? I mean, and some might look at you and say, okay, he's the curmudgeonly old guy who's been around here since '92. Others might say, where's the accountability going to come from? What do you think of that?
It's a great question, and I sometimes wonder myself. You know, the other thing is that I have never looked at this job as a stepping stone. And so I will simply say that I am here to represent the people in this particular job. And so there are things that I have said, there are things that I have voted on that are clearly going to rub people the wrong way. But I had no ambition as far as saying, you know what, my next step, I didn't have a next step. And so and that's kind of hard to do because these jobs, besides the ego that's involved as far as getting elected, you got to look at ambition. There's nothing wrong with ambition, but you know, we just talked about the young age. Well, with the young age comes other opportunities as people progress and get older. And so I'm hopeful that people will be in the moment and represent their constituency. But I'm not necessarily here to tell you that that's going to happen. With young people and with opportunities, ambitious people are going to do what ambitious people do.
I'm going to ask you two quick questions to end it. Number one, what got you into public service in the first place?
Great question. My 94-year-old father was John Doyne, who was the first Milwaukee County executive. My dad was his first chief of staff. I am the oldest of five. My dad wanted to run for office. My mom vetoed it. And so I am happy to say to you and to your listeners that my father is living vicariously through me. And I'm very, very proud of that.
And now, what's next? After this is done, what's next for Mark Borkowski?
You know, I'm going to do some substitute teaching. I've always felt that I belong in the classroom. I have a lot to offer. And I'm actually looking very much forward to a different audience, our young people. And I'd like to think that with my years of experience, that I've got something to provide for them. I've done some coaching also. And so these are all about life lessons. So I'm looking forward to that next phase.
Any idea where you'll be substitute teaching?
Well, right now I'll be in the Tulsa school system because that's where I've basically done all of my my paperwork. But I have options to go to some other school districts, and so we'll just kind of go from there.
And maybe you'll field some questions from reporters still looking for an opinion now and again.
Anytime, bud.
All right. Alderman Borkowski, thank you so much for all of your availability over the years and for your service to the community members here in Milwaukee.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, but I just want to say thank you to my constituents. I am grateful for this opportunity. Clearly, it was not one person. I've had so much support. You know, you find out who your friends are. I've got a lot of friends, and it's made it all the worthwhile. So it's not just the Mark Borkowski show. I was just lucky to be part of it. So there.
All right. Thanks a lot, Alderman. Take care.
You know, Jason, as we were watching that here and listening, you were talking about, he talked about availability, and you said that he was one of the people who was always in his council office. It was true when he was a county supervisor. He was always there. He was always has been very big into constituent work, the stuff that doesn't make the headlines, but people are calling in. They need something done with the street light on their street. Mark Borkowski was there answering those phones.
Mm-hmm. And he'd give out his cell phone to if you called his office line, you would get a voicemail that said, "I'm not in right now," but if he wasn't in, with the time that he wasn't in the office, here's my cell phone, give me a call or call my home. So I mean, how many aldermen are giving their home phone number and say, just give me a call at home, okay? But he was always inside or working inside City Hall. You'd be able to grab him for an interview, ask him, hey, what's going on with this issue or that issue in the city government? He'd give you his thoughts.
And always willing to give you an animated soundbite.
Yes. And that's why I regret I didn't ask him this one question, because years ago I had done a story where there was a controversy over Milwaukee County transit buses adding bike racks. And there was a constituency fueled by talk radio that said the bike racks were a waste of money and no one was going to use these things. And Mark Borkowski said the numbers they are projecting are so off the charts, they're never going to be realized. And he said, if they ever reach those numbers, I will eat my tie. Well, eventually they reached those numbers, and I didn't get to ask him. I failed to ask him if he ever ate his tie. So if you're watching Alderman Borkowski and you want to come on, join us live.
Well, we have his cell phone. We'll just call him. We'll ask him.
You do have my cell phone as well. So if you are listening right now, give me a call and we will put you on to answer that question from Brian. Brian, I have to ask you a question. Did you call him a name in that interview?
I didn't call him a name. I said some people might look at you as the curmudgeonly, old guy's been around, and I forgot what the context it was, but I used the word curmudgeon.
Some might say. You balanced it with some might say.
Some might say. I didn't say I was saying. No, but he's been around a long time. Clearly an old school politician, and we all kind of reacted when he talked about his family history going so far back. Obviously a political family, and so he spent a lifetime in public service. Now, his seat, District 11, is one of 3 that is that does not have an incumbent when it comes to common council seats. District 7, which is, I believe, Khalif Rainey's seat that he is vacating. Then District 10, Michael Murphy. District 11 is Alderman Borkowski. So those 3 seats will turn over to new hands. And at that point, after this election tonight, there will be 11 members of the Common Council who were not on the council before 2020. So 11 of the 15 seats will have changed hands in a little over 4 years. That's a tremendous amount of turnover. Obviously, as he talked about, it's time for some fresh faces, and that's what we're seeing.
And to say that another way, as far as that turnover, 11 of 15, that's 73% of the seats will have flipped from 2020 on to 2024. I mean, that's 73%. The institutional knowledge here, you're talking about 1, 2, after tonight's election, after these new people are sworn in, 3 people will remain, right? 3 people on that.
I think 4 since prior to 2020. Yeah, there was one more on the back. Of your page.
Okay, 4. Right, yeah. 4. There's four people,
and you've got them. Who are the 4? It's I know obviously Bob Bauman's been around for a long time. Malela Coggs.
Yeah, Bauman, Malela Coggs, Jose Perez, the Common Council president, and after this new election, then the Common Council will elect who they want to be their Common Council president moving forward. It does come with a nice pay raise. They also get to appoint the positions for committees and things like that. So it is a powerful position. And we saw Cavalier Johnson was the Common Council president. And what happened when Mayor Tom Barrett was appointed to become ambassador to Luxembourg, the acting the Common Council president becomes the acting mayor. So we've seen that happen several times in our lifetimes where you've had an acting mayor of Milwaukee was the Common Council president, took that role of acting mayor.
The other one on the back page, by the way.
Oh, sorry, Russell Stamper. So Stamper, Coggs, Perez, and Bauman.
Now, I want to talk about one other city office because it's one other that you have done a story on because it's not usually a controversial election, certainly not in the city of Milwaukee, but city attorney.
I would venture a guess most people don't know what the city attorney does.
Or do they even know that? Would you even know if you didn't live in Milwaukee that you elected your city attorney?
Right.
That it's an elected position.
The city attorney is an elected position, and for many, many, many years that was Grant Langley in Milwaukee, and he would run for re-election, often unopposed or without a serious opponent, until the last election cycle when Tierman Spencer was elected. And now Tierman Spencer is being challenged. And Jason did put a story together on that. Sarah is nodding her head at me, which means we have that ready to play. So here's some background.
Milwaukee voters first elected Grant Langley as Milwaukee City Attorney in 1984. That was the case until 2020, when Tierman Spencer beat Langley.
I inherit what is called a hostile environment. I walked into it.
City data reveals the city attorney's office had 6 resignations in the 3 years before Spencer. But from 2020 through September 2021, 14 staff resigned.
Day one, I've been persecuted, and it continued.
Back in 2021, Spencer blamed the rise in resignations partly on low pay, but also criticized the Common Council and the media.
I'm getting very concerned about that and their reporting.
Then in November last year, the city's inspector general called for Spencer to face criminal charges. The inspector said Spencer's deputy worked private cases on the city's time.
Well, you have to consider the source, first of all. And I think it's absurd and ludicrous to say you want to bring up charges. Let me explain that to you. First of all, there is no certification process here. Everybody self-reports.
The city this year settled a harassment case against Spencer. The city agreed to pay $40,000 to one of Spencer's former staff attorneys. On Tuesday, State Representative Evan Goyke is looking to oust Spencer. The Wisconsin Democratic Party endorsed Goyke, as have groups as different as the Teachers Union and the Police Union.
So, to back that up, the Teachers Union and the Police Union are endorsing the same candidate.
And so there's a little subtlety there that that you might need to explain here. The Teachers Union tends to be on the more liberal side of things. They tend to endorse candidates that are liberal for Common Council, County Board, etc. The Police Union, for example, during a presidential election year or governor's election year, they are usually endorsing the Republican side of things in Milwaukee. But here in this particular race, you've got people on the left and the right, normally with their endorsements backing the state representative.
And why would the teachers union and police union be so invested in who the city attorney is that they're making endorsements?
And in backing the challenger to an incumbent.
Right. And I think, you saw some of the issues that were raised in that story where over the course of the 4 years that Chairman Spencer has been the city attorney, there's been these resignations. We saw sort of a surge in resignations in 2020 and 2021, the first year and a half of his term as city attorney. We saw this discrimination complaint that led to a $40,000 settlement this year. Actually, in the last month or two, the city paid that out. And you saw these things that we talked about in the story. Why are these different outside groups getting involved in the city attorney race? The city attorney, it might not be the most important role in city government, but if you look at what the city attorney does, it oversees the legal. So anytime the city's sued, the city attorney's office, pretty much the city attorney leads a team of lawyers. So his staff, his or her staff, leads a team of lawyers that represent Milwaukee in court when there's lawsuits, settlements, complaints, etc. The other thing the city attorney's office does with that team of lawyers is they review proposed ordinances to say, okay, does this ordinance, a particular lawmaker might want to make an ordinance, like for example, the mask mandates back in 2020. Well, the city attorney's office is going to review the text of that language and say, okay, is this constitutional? Could it be thrown out by a court? Are we going to have an expensive lawsuit if we enact this ordinance? So the city attorney's office is also reviewing proposed ordinances to make sure that they actually are constitutional and would be
and public records requests,
right,
which we file quite a bit of. Like we're usually dealing with the city attorney's office if there's a back and forth.
So you're talking about significant public policy decisions. You're talking about potentially expensive lawsuits when police are sued and you're defending the city and the police department.
What about
These
the
open
teachers?
Records requests. Yeah. What are the teachers interested in?
The city's attorney's office also represents those cases against MPS as well.
Okay.
So that is where the teachers union comes in. That's where the police union comes in, because the city attorney's office is going to be the attorney representing you as a police department or a teacher in MPS. So those are some of the issues why they're getting involved. Why in particular Goike over Spencer, I think, looking just at some of these controversies. Another thing I need to mention, go ahead.
No, it just makes me wonder, is maybe they're interested in this, but for the voters going to the polls because they want to vote on the MPS referendum or in the presidential election, they're going to look at that and do they know who Evan Goike is? Do they know who Chairman Spencer is? And do they care who or know who MPS and the police union are supporting, or the teachers union? Do they know? Or are they going to look at like a lot of races and there's such a power to incumbency? Mm-hmm. Are they going to look and say, well, I've heard Chairman Spencer's name. Do they know? I guess it's not like we've been seeing attack ads for the last 6 months.
Yeah, we haven't seen ads on television for this particular race. You talked about two things. One is the power of incumbency. The previous person that Chairman Spencer beat in 2020, Grant Langley, he was in office from 1984 through 2020. So
Amanda, where were you in 1984?
Not born.
Okay, that's it. Yeah.
Do you want to ask where
My
I was?
parents got married in 1988.
Probably in diapers. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely in the Chicago suburbs as a little teeny tiny infant. So from 1984 to 2020, this person, Grant Langley, was the city attorney. And I went back to look. We wanted video to include in our story there. And at that point, there was only a few settlement cases where this city attorney would appear in stories, but it's not like we were covering him on a daily basis. It was very rare that we found any clips of him at all, because the office tends to have low profile. They're doing sort of legal analysis behind the scenes, guiding city departments to make sure that they're following state law and state constitutional matters in their...
Now, there's one interesting thing here that on the ballot, he's not listed as Chairman Spencer this time. He was last time. Mm-hmm. What's up with that?
Well, I wish I could tell you. You may have wondered why did we have sound bites from Chairman Spencer that were not from today presently? Well, he didn't get back to me for an interview. The two numbers that were listed on his campaign Facebook and website, they went straight to this call cannot be completed as dialed. This number is no longer in operation, kind of a message from the operator. So those two phone numbers didn't go through. Then I looked at his campaign disclosure forms and was able to find his campaign treasurer's phone number, called her, said, hey, I'd like to interview the city attorney for a story we're working on. She said, well, I'll try to get in touch with him. Didn't hear back from him. I also emailed the campaign email as well. Didn't hear back from Mr. Spencer to include him in that story and ask him, why on the ballot are you T. Spencer? So if you're voting in Milwaukee today and you have 9 minutes to get to get to your polling place and vote, or get in line in by 9 minutes. I wanted to say, so this time around on your ballot for city attorney, he's listed as T. Spencer. Back 4 years ago, it was Tierman Spencer. What is the rationale for this? I think Evan Goyke would say he's trying to potentially hide from some of these scandals that have been in the office, the city attorney's office, the last 4 years. But I need to ask the city attorney myself that question, and I didn't have the opportunity. Unfortunately, didn't get back to me.
And you also reached out to Evan Goyke for the story as well, right?
Yes. So Evan Goyke did get back to me. He actually texted me and said that he had family in town for Easter and was unable to join us for an interview. He got back to me like 2:50 or 3 o'clock, and I think the story was running at 4 or 5. So didn't have time.
Inside the life of a reporter.
But he did apologize for not being able to. Usually he's pretty accessible with interviews, and he did apologize for that. So we looked back at what was at stake, and again, what is the city attorney's job to do? Because people see it on the ballot. Well, this is an elected position. What does he do? What does he or she do? And it's a lot of roles.
And let's talk about what's at stake with Goyke specifically, because this would not be his first entrance into the political arena.
That's right. So he's currently a state representative. He sits on the very powerful budget writing committee in Madison. So that's the committee where Republicans and Democrats hash out the state budget, and they have very, very immense power in the state of Wisconsin to craft that budget moving forward. That's your tax money at work. That's all debated in Madison, and that committee is the one that oversees that debate and really tweaks the budgets and finesses it to figure out exactly how to spend your tax money. So he's a state representative right now, and he's also now running for a city attorney.
And the significance here is that there are the Republicans in the assembly right now are 2 votes short of a super majority, which would mean they could override the governor's vetoes. There are 2 Democratic candidates for a judgeship and then for city attorney who, if they win those positions, in theory, if they gave up their seats in the assembly, then Republicans would have this super majority. One of them is running for a judgeship, which would require that person to give up the assembly seat immediately. City attorney does not require that. So if Evan Goyke wins today, if we find out tonight that he wins, would it be likely that he's going to hold on to both of those positions for a period of time to prevent Republicans from getting that supermajority?
Right, yeah, two seats away from the supermajority. The legislative session is pretty much over for the election year. Usually they wrap up around this time.
They still have the possibility to override vetoes.
Yeah,
so that's the real key.
They can still override, and the governor even today vetoed one of those bills that had gained controversy over transgender athletes that the governor vetoed today. And but it's still, I mean, these are things that I don't want to speak for Evan Goyke because I didn't have that chance to have that conversation, but I would imagine he would hold both positions. We've seen it done. We actually have current examples of county supervisors who are also state representatives, so it's possible to hold those 2 positions at the same time. But I do know that former President Trump was in town today. He spoke in a very pivotal, crucial swings part of the state, which is Green Bay. And I know Sam Kramer was there, and he was covering the former president's remarks and speech in Green Bay.
I think we have Sam right now. Speak of Sam Kramer. Hey, Sam, how are you doing? And tell us a little bit about President Trump's visit today.
Hi, you guys. I'm doing well. I'm coming to you live from the corner booth at a McDonald's in Green Bay.
Again,
because
election
of
glamour.
The elements. Yep, it's as glamorous as everybody thinks it is, right?
Ashley was in a car. You're at a fast food restaurant.
Well, they gave us a brief 30 minutes to get out of there after the former president was done speaking. And then you topple that with the severe snowstorm that's going on outside, and it makes for an interesting day. But back to the topic at hand. He spoke for about an hour and, really leveled into President Joe Biden and frankly, what has happened the last 4 years versus what happened the 4 years of his presidency. And he talked a lot about the issues you would expect him to talk about as far as the border. He says that, the border was a lot more secure when he was president, and rallied off a bunch of statistics and said that, from day one, if he is elected president, he will kind of enact this mass deportation policy to send these people that are coming into the country illegally back to their home countries. And that was really just the start of it. He talked a lot about issues that have found support within the conservative parties, especially the far right. He talked about, at the end, ending or limiting funding for schools that have mask mandates or vaccine policies. He said he'd put an end to critical race theory. And so the issues that we've heard and talk about, he really tried to drum up in his base. And there were a lot of cheers. So it seems like he's certainly playing to the crowd.
And Sam, I did hear him specifically mention Wisconsin at one point, right?
He did. He talked about Whitewater, which I believe we've gone into a little bit as far as what an open border has done. And, the police department, the police chief sent a letter to the White House to talk about just how this influx of people has kind of put a strain on their existing resources. I believe the chief said he didn't want it to be politicized. Nonetheless, it has. And, I myself haven't actually gone to Whitewater and done that reporting and seeing actually the impact it's having. But that inclusion in his speech drew a lot of attention. It drew a lot of cheers as far as the need for change and why, these people that are coming to support him certainly would like to see him back for a second term versus President Biden.
He also claimed to have won Wisconsin the last time around in the presidential election, which we know he did not win. Joe Biden did. But
he made a very clear claim that, yes, he won Wisconsin, right?
Right.
I believe his words were, we won in 2016 and in 2020 we did even better, which is an interesting way to put it. He did get more votes, but with higher turnouts, he still lost by 20,000 votes. And that is a decent margin in a state known for razor thin elections. So it was interesting to hear that. He accuses the White House of election interference. He says that's why he's being essentially politically prosecuted with the 4 criminal cases and 2 civil cases. Earlier this week, he posted a $175 million bond for one of those cases. It was reduced from something like $450 million. And today, he said he was proud to do that. He said that, that sort of bond has never been levied before, not even against people that are charged with murder. And so it was interesting to hear him talk with his pride, but also in the sense that, he needs to gain support here, just looking at what's happened in 2020 and in 2016. He even said at one point he has more indictments than Al Capone, and that drew a lot of cheers as well. So it's interesting, it's his first visit back here since he was stooping for gubernatorial candidate Tim Michels in 2022. It seems like he really hasn't missed a beat as far as the campaign rally version of Donald Trump. We'll see if it sticks, though.
It sounds like this was a lot of red meat for the base, as you said. I mean, he's saying a lot of buzz phrases, some things that, he's talking about masks and other things. So there's red meat he's throwing out there. It's interesting that he's here on primary election night. There's no question who's going to win the Republican nomination for president, yet he's here. Obviously, it seems he is hoping to make a difference in these numbers, whatever kind of support he gets. Do we expect to see more of President Trump in the coming months, making himself more visible? You said it's the first time he's been here since 2022. I imagine this won't be the last time he's here before November.
I certainly expect him back. And he had some interesting comments as far as getting everybody in the room, which it was inside this kind of grand ballroom at this convention center. A lot of people, not just seats up front, but packed with standing room on the sides and then toward the back, toward where the media risers were. He said, I want everyone in this room to go out and vote after this, if you haven't already. We're going to win by a landslide. And of course, he should win if all of the other candidates essentially have dropped out. But they don't want, this kind of presumed nomination to keep people at home, say, hey, I don't have to vote. No, they still want you to go vote, they being the Republican Party. I certainly expect he will be back. He also, offered his full endorsement to U.S. Senate candidate Eric Hovde. So he's clearly trying to kind of drum up support, not just for his race, but certainly down ticket. And I think that's interesting at this time. Like you mentioned, there's no doubt he is going to, do well here when the numbers come out later tonight. But I think now that it's kind of settled, and mind you, he does have issues to take care of in court. Now I think we'll see him start to kind of hit those battlegrounds. He came from Michigan first earlier today, then to Wisconsin, and then got out before the snowstorm would likely keep him in. I imagine this is just the start of what we're going to see.
I should point out the polls are closed, by the way.
It's now after 8 o'clock. The polls in Wisconsin have just closed. So if you're just joining us on Fox Local here, we are talking with Sam Kramer in Green Bay, who was with President Trump today for a rally that the former President Trump had in Green Bay. We're joined by Sam Kramer right now.
Sam, I'm curious, what was the energy? President Trump has had at times some of these rallies that there's a tremendous amount of energy, and I know there was a lot of comparison back in 2020 when early in the campaign in particular, Joe Biden was, President Trump was very critical of Joe Biden for being, in his basement and for having these more sort of laid back, socially distant things that certainly didn't have the same energy. He was still going full bore. What was the energy in Green Bay like with the supporters you saw there?
There was a lot of energy. The former president, again, spoke for about an hour, and you could see he was certainly had a direction of where he wanted to go, but then just kind of fed off the energy in the room at times in addressing certain supporters. I talked to U.S. Representative Tom Tiffany before the former president took the stage, and I asked him, about the factions in this party that, some people say it's got to be all behind Trump. Others have said they will never vote for Trump within the Republican movement. And I asked him about, why be so steadfast in your support? And he says that for him, it comes down to policy over personality. And then he pivoted to talk about energy. He said, if you look at these two candidates, they're about the same age, give or take. And he pointed to former President Trump's energy versus that of current President Biden. And then it really was almost on display for about an hour. He got the crowd going. He revved them up. Again, the red meat is a perfect description of what this rally was. But clearly that energy was reciprocated. There were a lot of people there. They were chanting and yelling things, certainly their support for him, but also, things of essentially he wants to fire Biden. Certainly heard calls to lock him up too, which we've heard before. So there was, to answer your question in a long version, yes, there was a ton of energy tonight. And I think he's trying to capitalize on what is an election day, albeit maybe an already decided day, to take that into November.
Sam, what's on the menu for you? Is it double fillet of fish, supersized fries? What are we having before the 9 o'clock?
I got a quarter pounder. I intended to have it with cheese. There was no cheese. So you best believe I scarfed that down in about 30 seconds to hustle and get everything on it. I got a Diet Coke. Reporters sponsored by Diet Coke.
Yeah,
like we should be.
Sam, that's my order too.
Tim Van Voren did, I don't know if you know about the list.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
So can you, Brian's been
The
here
list?
the longest.
So
of all of us, Brian's going to explain the list.
So Andy Conkle, photographer Andy Conkle, and who's no longer at Fox 6, but he and Tim Van Voren go to Green Bay for all sorts of Packers-related things, and every time they would go, the idea was that they would eat at a different place for lunch. They would never eat at the same place, and they continued to build that list. And I think they finally, after I don't know how many restaurants they hit, they finally ran out of places to go, I think, right? Or they just finally stopped doing that.
And at the end of the list, they started they went to all of the gas stations. They went to the convenience store. I mean, every place that they could find that served food. And they got, was it to 100? I think it was to 100. But that piece, I believe, is on Fox. So maybe we could tweet that out in a little bit if people want to watch that particular classic gem of TVV.
One of the places we went to was the Wisconsin Center for Aging and Disability in Green Bay.
So you guys went to the hospitals too,
food?
Right? They actually went
at a cafe.
Did they just show up and say, "Hey, we have nowhere else to go that's not on the list, so just feed us"?
It was an open cafe to the public.
Okay, all right. Well,
they may
fantastic.
or may not have also went to the hospital.
All right. Well,
okay.
Sam, you got a long way to go to catch up on that list. But hey, Sam, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. You guys stay warm, and we'll see you later.
All right, Fox 6's Sam Kramer in Green Bay.
We have the easy
President
gig.
Trump. Yeah, we do. Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest gig today would have been covering tailgating at for the home opener for the Milwaukee Brewers. So
Stephanie Quirk.
Stephanie Quirk was out there with. We have these Fox 6 rain coats that are have a nice protective coating of rainproof whatever they put on that stuff, and it was 100% saturated. You could just see. I don't know if we have a clip of it, but it was just. I mean, the coat was no longer a coat. I mean, it was just it was terrible.
But the thing is, we've had opening days where in home openers where the weather was really, really cold, really, really windy, really, really snowy. I feel like that windy, cold rain is the most miserable of all. And I say that as I sit here in a warm studio with a sweater on and I'm dry as can be. But I just think the cold rain is absolutely miserable. But there's a roof on the stadium, so at least everyone inside was covered in warm. So polls are closed. It's 8:06. If you didn't make it to the polls, well, you'll have to wait until the next one. But we should, not long from now, start to see some results. I know Amanda's already starting to scan and scroll and see if anything early is coming in. There's so many races we haven't even talked about, and I know one of them, Jason, is Kenosha Mayor. That is really a big one because it's only the third mayor in Kenosha. The current mayor John Anaramian is not running for re-election. Be the third mayor since 1990?
92.
92.
So
okay, 1992.
1992. I don't know if you remember what you're doing then, but George H.W. Bush was in the White House, and the city of Kenosha's only had two mayors since that point, and so now they're going to pick tonight. They're picking the third, and I know we visited or we heard from the candidates on different pressing issues about what they wanted to tackle first, and I don't know if we have that story ready to go, but
I see a thumbs up from Kale, so we do.
But again, two people running. It was a jam-packed primary in Kenosha. 9 people running. I mean, because again, a lot of these Wisconsin mayors tend to have really long terms if they want. And we saw that with Tom Barrett. We saw that with his predecessors, and we saw that in Kenosha, where the current mayor has been there for 24 years, on and off. He did take time, so he took a recess as mayor from like 2008 to 2016, but total time 24 years in office there in Kenosha, on and off.
Let's play the piece.
Since 1992, only 2 people have been Kenosha mayor. Next Tuesday, the city will elect the third, one of these 2.
I'm honored to be a candidate for mayor as the first woman in Kenosha's 200-year history ever to seek this office.
That's Lydia Spotswood, who was a nurse and was an alderwoman until 1998 when she ran for Congress and lost to Paul Ryan. She serves on several Kenosha boards, including the City Plan Commission. It's her versus David Bogdala.
Kenosha truly is at a juncture, but it's at a crossroads. There are a lot of great things happening in Kenosha.
He's been a Kenosha alderman for 16 years and works as a program manager at Abbott.
I'm the only candidate in this race that is endorsed by both the Kenosha Professional Police Association as well as the Kenosha Firefighter Association.
While the Kenosha County Democrats are urging votes for Spotswood.
I want to prioritize the growing public safety concerns. Among those concerns is the feeling throughout our city that we have a healthcare desert that's growing east of Green Bay Road.
Both candidates said the city's technology needs major upgrades.
Our IT system at City Hall is atrocious. To say it's in the dark ages is probably the biggest understatement.
We're going to have this freight train of development coming at us. It's on the way now with absolutely outdated systems, and the city's not prepared.
Soon a new mayor will lead this Wisconsin city on Lake Michigan between Chicago and Milwaukee, a city with 100,000 people. Jason Calvi, Fox 6 News.
First new mayor in Kenosha in quite some time, and that is, we talked about so many things that are on the ballot. We haven't even talked about the non-school referendums, and there are a number of those, including Ozaukee County, which has 6 fire and EMS referendums. You did a story on one of these, or multiple. I don't know. What did you do the story on, Jason?
We did a couple different in Ozaukee County, Port Washington, and Cedarburg. And it's really interesting because the Wisconsin Policy Forum actually did a research report, I believe, back in 2021 on the the situation of fire protection in Ozaukee County, and what they found was that they were really sort of not what the report found. I'm trying to find my notes here. Was that it found that they comparatively said it was a bare bones and an inexpensive approach to firefighting in Ozaukee County.
A lot of part-time firefighting.
Well, actually, to be honest with you, in Cedarburg, it was volunteers up until this year.
Sorry, volunteer paid on call.
Yeah. So no, it was actually in Cedarburg. It was all volunteers. They had a couple people that were paid, but now this year, 2024, Cedarburg started paying the volunteers on call, so they're paid on call now, and we see that in Port Washington where they're paid on call as well. But they're also trying to boost their calls. They're saying they're getting swamped with 911 calls. They have elderly communities there that are calling. That's the largest number of people that are calling 911 are elderly, and the deputy fire chief there in Port Washington said it was often falls that they were responding. People had fallen and needed help getting up, or were hurt or injured and needed a paramedic to come and help them.
Well, and you did a piece on this with some of the background. Let's take a look at that.
Firefighters getting burnt out.
Their EMS calls they're going through the roof.
The Cedarburg Fire Department says calls for help are up by 47% over the past decade. At the same time, those growing 911 calls are met with less volunteers, whom the Cedarburg Department has relied on since 1866.
It's becoming really hard for our volunteers to put that much time in to cover all of those calls.
So this year, the city started paying those on-call firefighters when they responded to a call.
Basically, the Cedarburg Fire Department has done this for free since 1866, and we just can't sustain it anymore.
But now the fire department's asking voters in the city and town to raise their taxes in order to boost the number of firefighters. It would add 8 full-time firefighter paramedics, and it would keep funding for 2 more spots that the Federal American Rescue Act money paid for. It's similar in Port Washington.
Our department is kind of at a breaking point.
It has a total of 5 full-time firefighters. American Rescue Act money is paying for 3 of those 5. The referendum funding would keep those 3 when the federal money runs out, and also add 6 more full-time firefighter paramedics.
I would look at this like an insurance policy.
But those opposed point to inflation and rising costs. In the city of Cedarburg, with a typical home assessed at $390,000, they'd pay about $264 more every year. For Port Washington, the typical home of $235,000 would pay an extra $213 a year. Soon, they'll decide whether to raise their taxes for more firefighters. In Ozaukee County, Jason Calvi, Fox 6 News.
And I should point out that through the magic of television, Professor Emeritus Mordecai Lee has appeared in the place of Jason Calvi.
Jason did not just significantly change appearance in the last minute and a half.
Well, we're going to talk to Mordecai in just a moment. I know there are a number of these fire and EMS referendums in Ozaukee County alone, and I think it's more than $5 million for something like 33 full-time positions.
So taking a peek at Jason's notes here, for all the Ozaukee Fire EMS referendums, still sounds worse than referenda, but referendums.
We settled that.
Yeah, we did. I still don't like it. $5.2 million for 34 total full-time positions. So the Cedarburg referendum is $2 million, and part of that goes to the city, part of that goes to the town. And so they would add 8 firefighters, keep 2 of the firefighters funded with ARPA money. That's what we were talking about before, right? The federal money that came in during COVID, and now the federal money goes away. What do we do with that? Now we're going to ask the taxpayers to raise their property taxes so we can keep those, and then add a full-time chief. For Grafton Saukville, that's just over $2 million. Some of that goes to the village, some of that goes to the town.
And that's part of a consolidation of those departments,
correct.
Right? Yeah.
So part of it goes to Village of Grafton, part of it goes to the town of Grafton, part of that goes to the town of Saukville, and they'd consolidate Grafton and Saukville. That's adding 13 total full-time positions. And then Port Washington is just over $1 million, 10 total full-time positions. Keep 3 of the ARPA, 6 firefighters, and then add a full-time chief. So really looking at the fire and EMS needs in Ozaukee County, and it's interesting to see the back and forth which Jason alluded to there.
A significant change in the professionalization of the way fire service works in Ozaukee County. We'll see how the results start to come in. Mordecai, we have you here, and obviously this is a presidential preference primary, but it almost seems like that's the afterthought right now because we know who the nominees are going to be for both of the parties. So what are you watching when it comes to this race?
Brian, it's such an odd night in the sense of being anticlimactic in terms of presidential races. The fact that there aren't any statewide races. There's no state Supreme Court race. There's no superintendent of public instruction. All you've got are two statewide constitutional amendments. And so I think it's appropriate that here in the Milwaukee media market, we're paying attention to sort of down ballot kind of races and issues. Whether it's school referenda, referendums. Now I'm
See, referenda just sounds
and I'm
better.
just telling you what
Team
what
referenda.
Cambridge University said.
Mordecai, will you join me? Team referenda.
Brian and I talked about this last time. Sometimes I think American usage trumps correct grammar, and I think someday referendums will be the Americanism. But up till now, I guess it's referenda. But speaking about referenda, besides the ones that you mentioned up in Ozaukee County and besides the school MPS here, there are amazingly number of school referenda, both in southeast Wisconsin and statewide, which to a certain extent is an indication of how over the years the legislature has really cramped the funding through school aids and with levy limits, and so schools more and more are turning to the voters. And
can you talk to us about levy limits? Because I don't think the average person at home necessarily knows what that is or how that works.
Sure. When the legislature gives money to a school district, it attaches a kind of rule or regulation to it, and it says, we're giving you this money, but we're capping how much you can ask the property taxpayers for. In other words, we don't want you to take our money and to increase your property taxes. We want the money we give you to be subtracted from the property tax levy. And so that's held down property taxes, but it's meant that both for city governments and for school districts and county governments, things got tighter and tighter and tighter. And when there was this sort of escape valve of having a referendum, the conservative members of the Wisconsin legislature and Governor Walker just never thought that the voters would approve increasing their own taxes. And so
certainly not at the rates they were for a while, right? Yeah, 80-90%.
Precisely. And it was understandable then, but then I think the reality of the lack of money just really started getting to people. And you found people, not just parents of kids going to school in that school district, but the broader public at large was voting in favor of referenda. And they had a long string of successes. And then when Brian and I were talking last time, for the February primary, a couple of school districts had suggested doing a referendum in February, probably thinking that was because there'd be a low turnout and they didn't have to convince many people to vote for them. But it turned out to be a tactical error that the lower the turnout, the more conservative the electorate skews. And so in southeast Wisconsin, as I recall, all the school referenda that were on the ballot in February all got wiped out.
Yeah, statewide, I think it was only 40% that passed, 4 out of 10. But do you think that because of that reasoning, there's more hope for those who are supportive of them here in April? Because there are 91 of these across the state now, and at a 40% rate, there'd be a lot of disappointed people in support of these.
Brian, I think you're onto something, because the logic of the electorate is that the larger the turnout, the more you've got a broader cross-section of the voters. In other words, in February, when we had, it was like 3 people voted. In February, when you have a low turnout, who are the voters? They're above average in age, so senior citizens. They're above average in education, and so usually college graduates. And they're above average in income. And when you think about what is the profile of those sort of 3 metrics, it's a conservative profile. But then today, you've got other layers of voters who are have, let's say, lower incomes or younger age? And would they be more likely to approve a referendum that would increase their taxes or their rent? And I think it's sort of logical that there might be a better batting average today than there was in February. The Milwaukee thing is just a really big pop. And, you know, the polls have now been closed for about a quarter of an hour, and I suppose we can speculate a bit. And I think the conventional wisdom is that it's going to get wiped out, that the MPS referendum is going to lose by a landslide. I don't think that's necessarily so. The odds are that it's going to fail, but I think the rain, believe it or not, you know, politicians believe in weather. They believe that the weather is linked to election results. And I think that the depressed turnout for today might have actually ended up being to the benefit of MPS. And so I think there's a kind of a chance that the MPS referendum will pass, will squeak by.
So we're going to be seeing results. It's just barely starting to trickle in, nothing that's even worth really talking about yet. But you have a list of numbers in front of you, and they have to do with presidential primaries. And I know we said that this is sort of anticlimactic. So is there anything we can read out of what we get today in terms of turnout that will be meaningful? Because a lot of what drives turnout in presidential primaries is the contests on the ballot. And in this case, we literally have two major parties where it's no contest.
There's no doubt about it. And Brian, I was looking over the statistics earlier today, and the lowest turnout we in Wisconsin have ever had for a presidential primary was in 2000. So that would have been the presidential election where George W. Bush was running as the Republican nominee. And, and
I've got it here. I believe that was Gore and Bradley, right? Yeah.
Gore
was pretty
much
on
the Democratic side. And the turnout was incredibly low. It was 22% of the Wisconsin electorate. It was only about 860,000 people voting. And the reason why I think that's an impressive statistic is, first of all, because I think today that's what we're going to be seeing. But in particular, because normally in a presidential primary in Wisconsin, you'll see 1.5 million, 2 million people voting. So if today is like 2,000 and we only have, say, 850,000 voters, that's less than a quarter of the electorate. And if you're dealing with less than a quarter of the electorate, then I think all bets are off. I think I wouldn't have the vaguest idea in such a disproportionately low turnout what the cumulative results will be.
Is there anything you might be looking for in terms of, you know, the not uncommitted, but unrestricted delegates and the number of people who vote that way? Does that mean or say anything? Uninstructed. Thank you. Uninstructed delegates. If those numbers are high, because those are usually, you know, nowhere near even 1%. It may be a percent, but if they're significantly higher, does that say something?
Brian, I think you're right. I think 1% is almost randomness. And I don't mean this in any derogatory way to the people who are campaigning for uninstructed delegate. 1% would indicate that there are 1% of the people who believe that this is a way to express their views in opposition to President Biden's stance in the Middle Eastern war. But let's say it's 4%. Let's say it's 5%. Let's say it's 6%. I think that's a lot of voters. Why? Because if a Democrat, or for that matter, a Republican, wants to win Wisconsin in a presidential election, and the last two presidential elections have been won in Wisconsin by 20 to 21,000 votes, if there's 1% of the voters who are saying they just do not like President Biden because of his Middle Eastern policy, wow, that could tip Wisconsin in November.
It makes me think, too, that things like campaign visits will play a really big role if Wisconsin looks like, again, it's going to be that razor-thin margin. And if for reasons like you just cited, if supporters of President Biden think maybe that margin might be in jeopardy, are we going to see more visits We just saw President Trump here in Green Bay today on Election Day. Are we going to be seeing more of both candidates and the vice presidential candidates? We don't yet know who Donald Trump's will be, but are we going to be seeing a lot more of them here in Wisconsin?
You know, when George W. Bush was running for re-election in 2004, they really wanted to win Wisconsin. They really thought they had a chance. And I'm not sure if people remember this, but he was in southwestern Wisconsin so much that I think he practically was eligible to vote in La Crosse. And, you know, he was in a bus. He was going all over rural La Crosse County and deeper into south central Wisconsin. And so I think one of the reasons why you're really putting your finger on something, and that's that it's not just that a candidate, let's say, is in Wisconsin and shakes 100 hands. You know, what's 100 hands? But I'll tell you what the magic is. The magic is getting on the local news. And the way you get on the local news.
That's right, Mordecai. That's
okay,
no.
Now you owe me $1. Okay.
That's the pep talk I give myself every morning. The magic is getting on the local news.
Because, you know, in the last couple of weeks, a couple of cabinet secretaries have come through Milwaukee and come through Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And I doubt 1% of Wisconsinites know that, because that's just not as important a position as the candidate who's a president or who's a vice president or former president. They're the ones who get on local news. And so even if they only shook 100 hands, or even if there were only a couple hundred people in Green Bay who were present when President Trump was there earlier today, the coverage in local news, so-and-so was in Wisconsin, and here's what they said, that carries so much weight for an electorate that's starting to pay attention. It carries much more weight than, let's say, a zillion ads on TV.
We are starting to see some results come in with 5% of precincts reporting. Let's look at the race for president on the Republican side. I think you just had it up a moment ago, Cale. But we are seeing 77%.
You're getting the hold on sign.
I'm
from
okay,
Sarah.
But I'm still going to tell you what it is, and then we'll see the graphic support in a minute.
I see the hold on sign, and I'm going to ignore it and say what I was going to say anyway.
The graphic support will come, but here's 77% of the vote for there we go, for 78 now for Donald Trump, 14% for Nikki Haley, and even that uninstructed delegation 2%. I know it's very early. Are you surprised at all by those numbers? I mean, these are the names that are on the ballot, and for many people, whether or not they know there's a presumptive nominee, there are names on the ballot. What does this tell you? Anything?
Brian, I've got to tell you, I'm stunned by these numbers, and I think you're right that we should not put too much emphasis on this. This is, you know, just 15% of the electorate, but that Donald Trump did so well in so many states that he's already the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party, and that Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley have dropped out of the race. They're sort of dead horses, for lack of a better term. That they're put together getting sort of 17% of the vote, plus 2% to 19%. This is very surprising. This is an indication that people got up this morning and they said, you know, and sort of 3 out of 4 of them said, I'm a Republican, I'm going to vote today, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. But that maybe a quarter of them or 12% of them got up this morning and said, I know Donald Trump is going to be the nominee, but today is the only day that I get to express my views as a rank and file voter about this reality of Trump versus Biden. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing some similar numbers.
Speaking of that, let's look at the Democratic side, because you were talking about the uninstructed delegation being really interesting on that side. And what I'm seeing here in front of me is, with 13% of the precincts reporting, and the graphic Cale gives you may be more of an update, but 8%. 89% for Joe Biden, 8% uninstructed delegation.
A little more than 4,000 votes. Wow, that's jumped up there.
And look at that. Dean Phillips, who is a congressman who wanted to provide a kind of a positive alternative to Joe Biden and has dropped out, gets another 3%. So 11% of Wisconsin voters right now are saying anybody but Joe Biden, just like the Republicans who said anybody but Donald Trump. And I think for the people who particularly were campaigning for an uninstructed vote, I think we have to be careful. We have to interpret this, that some of that 8% or whatever the final number is, are truly in disagreement with the president's treatment of the Gaza-Israel war. But I'm skeptical that all 8% voted that way because of that.
Right.
I'm guessing that some of them were just plain, can't we do any better than Joe Biden? And, 3%, just like I was surprised by the number we just saw for Haley and DeSantis, I'm surprised that Dean Phillips is getting 3% of the vote. So
how much of that is the power of having your name on the ballot, though? Because I think a lot of people might show up hearing it's election day and they're not paying any attention or not that close of attention. And maybe they see a name and they go, you know what? I'm just tired of Donald Trump, or I'm tired of Joe Biden, and there's some other names, and I'm going to pick those.
And this one sounds kind of sort of familiar.
Yeah.
I've got to say that if anybody got up this morning and said, I'm unhappy with the Biden-Trump matchup, but therefore I'm not going to vote, that would be sort of understandable. That's sort of the apathetic electorate. But we're talking about people who took the time to go and vote, and I think they were pretty well motivated.
You're right. There's not like some other major issue they were going for, and there happened to be a presidential primary.
Right.
Unless it was someone showing up to vote for the MPS referendum. Right?
Or
like there are
local race.
Some of the local things might have driven people out.
You seem like you're not buying that. You're skeptical.
For sure. I mean, in the city of Milwaukee, once we can have some sense of reports from the city of Milwaukee that give us an indication compared to, let's say, a statewide vote, that'll tell us something. But certainly those two constitutional amendments had no sex appeal at all. The conservative.
If you can even understand what they mean, I mean, certainly by the wording.
Talk about inside baseball. This is inside baseball.
Speaking of, by the way, and I know it's a small number, with 4% of precincts reporting, both of the statewide constitutional amendments are currently leading by a 2-to-1 margin. The yes votes are leading, but again, it's very, very early. It always depends on where those votes come from.
But still, the Republican legislature passes those constitutional amendments as a way of detouring around a Democratic governor. And so they've sent a signal to voters, rank and file voters who are Republicans, saying, we think this is a good idea. We hope you'll vote that way. And Democrats are sending the opposite message. And right now, I suspect that those numbers will probably hold. It'll probably be 70-30 or 60-40. Because that's simply that a lot of voters on constitutional amendments say, well, gee, if it got this far, if it passed two legislatures, a majority in both houses 2 times, then, gee, it must be a good idea.
Keep in mind, it's going to be a second before we have the Milwaukee numbers. So
sure,
I think that coming in is going to be the thing to watch.
I wish I had so many more questions for you about what to make of this presidential primary, but it seems like it's going to be limited what we can take away that will be meaningful come November.
Well, let me just throw out one suggestion, because you guys are going to be on the air before the 9 o'clock. Your competitors, the 9 o'clock news goes on.
They're our friends. We support them.
And Ben and Steph are some of my best friends, and but I take the rule of thumb that once a quarter of the vote is in, that you can start beginning to make an assumption that that's a random sample. In other words, if we're starting to talk about 1 out of every 4 voters, what are the odds that all of those are, I don't know, liberals from Dane County or conservatives from Waukesha County? By 25%, you're starting to get a mix. And certainly by 30 to 35%, we'll know the trends for the evening. So I think that while this is on the air and you guys are continuing the conversation, I think within minutes, you're going to be able to start saying it looks like this is what the trend is.
Well, Mordecai, as always, we thank you so much for the time you spend with us here, the time you did in February. And, of course, we look forward to having you back here in November when the stakes are the highest.
Brian, Jason here, can I ask one question with Mordecai there in the chair and I'm back here
I love
in the production suite?
This is the best part. And look at Kale's got the shot ready to go. Yeah. This is fantastic.
So here's my question, Mordecai. We just got our first email from one of the Milwaukee Common Council members celebrating her victory, even though we don't have any results from Milwaukee, Marina Dmitrievich. Celebrating her victory because she is unopposed. When you look at the Milwaukee numbers, 7 of the 15 Common Council seats were unopposed. 46% of the Common Council seats, nobody was challenging
there was one person on your ballot. What do you make of that right now in Milwaukee, that there was 46% of the seats unopposed?
You know, I think it's a mix of a couple of trends. I don't think there's one facile kind of answer. But to a certain extent, members of the Common Council don't have a lot to be involved in when it comes to what you call the substance of government, public policy. Yeah, every once in a while they pass an ordinance or a policy that affects everybody, and it's very important. But the day-to-day work of a member of the Common Council is often constituent service. Why wasn't my garbage picked up today? Why did it take 10 minutes for the police to come and answer my emergency call? Things like that. So it's possible that the position itself does not attract the kind of variety of potential candidates who say, gee, I'd really like to get in there. I'd really like to be in the arena and fight for something. And so that's one of them. But Jason, the incumbent advantage is another one. You know, over 4 years, a member of the Common Council sends out newsletters, does town hall meetings, does press, sometimes is interviewed by TV reporters. And they gradually develop a kind of, not quite invincibility, but an intimidation of, wow, that member of the Common Council has been in for 2 terms. I've seen them on TV. They've got $20,000 in their campaign fund. I just, give up. And so,
although it wasn't like there was a feeding frenzy for some of the seats there where there is no incumbent.
That's right. And again, I think there's sort of layers of the cake, sort of a kind of marble cake, that lots of things are happening. But that's sort of got to be one of the explanations.
Well, and I'd imagine for someone who is maybe thinking of dipping their toe in, you show up at a Common Council meeting and you hear all the different terms that are flying around. It can feel like a much larger barrier to enter when you see a group of people sitting around who seem to know what all these terms means, and you're throwing out all these numbers and you have the history of that.
There's no doubt about it. You're right. And I think one thing that puzzles me is that the county board, members of the county supervisors on the county board, they used to have a salary that was commensurate with a full-time job. And it was a 4-year term, as I recall. And it was an important position. And then the state legislature changed it and it became a 2-year term and a part-time job and a lower salary. And so I haven't been surprised in this cycle that there aren't very many county board seats that are challenged. But Common Council, they get a decent salary. It's a full-time job. They're involved in things that affect people's lives. So I am surprised by the dearth of opposition.
A couple months ago when we had Michael Murphy on here via Zoom, outgoing Alderman Michael Murphy, he was talking about also this negative connotation with being a politician, right? And especially as we talk about political insider kind of being a negative thing, and the concept of, politicians, they're corrupt, or it means you're going to be swayed a certain way. And he was talking about his pushback against that because, hey, this truly is public service. This doesn't have to be about the political back and forth. Now, our job as journalists, of course, is often to expose that corruption when it happens or point out when we see inconsistencies. So there's a natural tension there. But I did think it was interesting the way he was thinking about what the term politician means and how that's been connected in a way that maybe would discourage someone from running.
There's no doubt about it. I think it's a fair generalization, what you said, to go a step further and say that we as Americans hate politicians. And
lawyers, politicians, journalists, we're all high on the list of.
There you go. I don't want
despised.
my daughter to marry a politician, right, or something like that. There's just a negativeness that you can almost trace back to the Declaration of Independence. What was the Declaration of Independence? It was being mad as heck, and they're not going to take it any longer. And so they declared independence. And that's very deeply rooted.
We have the balance of powers because of the fundamental idea that you can't trust the politicians too much, right?
I'm never running for King of England, so that's off the table.
Absolutely. You put your finger on it. And so Michael was right that there's always that tendency amongst voters, while at the same time, at other times, this very same people will say, gee, I wish some more honorable people would run for office.
Right. It's the job. It's the job. No one wants themselves, but everyone wants someone else to want. Right.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Professor Lee, thank you so much again for being here. As always, we will see you in November for sure. You got to go ahead and get on Fox 6 News on the air. We're going to bring Jason Calvi, I think. Are you coming back in here, Jason, or are you just going to hang out back in the shadows with
I don't
Kayla
know.
and
He
Sarah?
looks reluctant.
I think
He looks
you
like
your
he'd
spot
rather sit back there.
I think he does.
I want to ask him a question.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Mordecai wants to ask you a question, Jason.
All right, so you see some scrolling on your screen there. We are seeing some more numbers come in. One of the things I'm seeing, the two statewide constitutional amendments now with 20% of precincts reporting. The gap has closed a little bit. It's still a 57% to 43% lead for the yeses for question 1, which would prohibit private funding of elections, and a 60 to 40 spread for requiring only election officials to administer elections rather than other outside groups helping to participate in that process. So right now, those two amendments pushed by Republican lawmakers in Wisconsin are leading roughly 60-40. Again, 20% of precincts currently reporting. We're not seeing any numbers yet out of Milwaukee, so we can't tell you anything about the MPS
and it
referendum.
might be a minute.
And I think that one's going to be a while, so we can't tell you anything about Milwaukee mayor or any of those aldermanic seats, but of course we're going to be watching that.
Closely following Kenosha's mayoral race as well. We don't have results there.
We haven't scrolled down far enough to see what's going on.
I think
with
it's
that.
right above the Milwaukee, right below the Milwaukee section. But the second
right,
constitutional question deals with whether or not election officials are the ones. Pretty much, it would ban the constitutional amendment would ban other folks that are not election officials from administering elections, and that came out of Green Bay. And I was reading through those emails that were public records that were released, and I found some of those emails from Green Bay where a person who is affiliated with an outside nonprofit group was helping Green Bay with the election. And some of the things that we found in those emails were, he said, quote, "I'm helping Milwaukee assign inspectors to central count stations as well as polling places." And another attached document he called central count procedures, and he shared that document with a group in Green Bay, with the Green Bay officials, and said, here's what we helped Milwaukee create. So there was this idea that these outside groups were helping the election clerks do their job. Now at Green Bay, they said that, for example, Milwaukee, the election director there, Claire Woodall, said that she couldn't do an interview when I asked her back when this story broke from Green Bay, but she said she remained in control of all election administration decisions and functions for the city of Milwaukee since July. And so, these outside groups were assisting, but she said she was in control of all those duties that she was entitled, empowered to do through her role as the election director in Milwaukee.
So with 32% of precincts reporting in the presidential race and the Republican presidential primary, Donald Trump has 78% still. Nikki Haley has 25,000 votes, 14%. She is not in the race anymore, but her name was on the ballot, just 25,000 votes. So we are seeing, as Professor Lee was talking about, seeing some numbers on both sides, really, because also in the race on the other side of the aisle, you have 8%, I think, were the uninstructed delegates. So there are some protest votes in both of those camps.
Right, and the question is, are those people going to come home to their parties if they're voting for Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis? 14 plus 4, so that's what is that 18?
18%.
Yeah, 18 plus.
We're journalists; we can do math.
I really was because of the being far away over there, but
that's what it was.
So sure. are those 14 or 18% of Republicans who are right now with the polls 32% going to come back home to the Republican Party and vote for Donald Trump? I think some of the Republicans that I spoke with, that are doing these protest votes would say yes, they are going to end up voting, but this was their, as Professor Mordecai Lee said, this is their one opportunity to express their displeasure with the nominees on both sides. And we're seeing what we saw in Michigan, where these uninstructed voters got 100,000 votes there in Michigan. We're seeing quite a bit of people on both sides, Republican and Democratic side tonight, voting for the uninstructed.
And this
same
spread
question.
is holding, by the way. We're up to 39%. It seems like that's a pretty solid spread right there.
Right.
Where it's not moving much.
Yeah, I think, and then the question for Democrats, right, who are registering their protest vote, are they going especially those who are voting in opposition of President Biden's record with Israel, are they really going to like what Donald Trump, what his stance on Israel is going to be that much better, right? That they would
But the question
go
is,
there
will they
and
come
not
to the
come back
polls
to
at all,
Biden,
or will
right?
they stay home? And that's
right.
the real question for both of these candidates, is not just who will come over to their side and who will vote for them, but who will be energized enough to come out and vote at all.
When you look at that uninstructed delegation there for the Democratic side, 10% with 40% estimated votes coming in already.
About 23,000 votes.
Yeah, so I want to just compare that with what we saw with uninstructed votes back in 2020. The last time Joe Biden and Donald Trump were on the ballot in Wisconsin together. On the Democratic side, we saw only 3,590 uninstructed votes on the Democratic side.
In the primary?
In the primary, uninstructed voters, 3,000. And today, what was the number, 23,000?
Can we bring it back up? I already
off
forgot.
the screen already. But the point of the matter is we're seeing a groundswell that we haven't seen in the past, in most recent elections, of people voting this option of uninstructed. I think it comes out of what we saw in Michigan, where you saw 100,000 people voting that way, voting for the uncommitted.
Here we go.
Here we go. So 10%,
Yeah.
24,000 votes. That's
In 2020, you said, I think it was like 35?
20,000 for Biden was 3,500.
3,590 votes.
I'm sorry. Let me repeat that. In 2020, the Democratic uninstructed votes were 3,500. This time around, 24,000 uninstructed votes in Wisconsin, 10%. I mean, we haven't seen that in recent elections. This is an incredible.
You go back to 2016, it was literally 0.1%
right.
uninstructed.
Yeah.
And I go back one time before that, 2%, almost 2% in the 2012 race. That was the re-election of Barack Obama. And then in 2008, the election, the year that Barack Obama was first elected president, the uninstructed was something on the order of 0.1%.
Yeah.
10% is a huge number.
Yeah, we're seeing something's going on here where people are sending a message through this vote. Be great to bring back the Republican to see how many uninstructed we have on the Republican side, but people are sending a message, and I think Michigan gained some national attention for voting that way, and they said, hey, they're actually going to get 2 delegates in Michigan because there was enough voters to get some delegates in Michigan. So those 2 people, I wonder how they're going to pick them, are going to be going to the convention, not for Joe Biden on the Democratic side. In Wisconsin, you have to get to the threshold on the Democratic side of 15% to get some delegates. So it's possible if we can bring those numbers back up from the...
You're killing Sarah right now. You are killing Sarah.
Pretty much just keep the uninstructed up there from the Democratic side.
I'm also going to need
because I'm not going to stop talking about this because it's just so
Jason
fast.
just got a passive-aggressive thumbs up.
I also
Looks
need
like
a double
this.
fillet of fish and supersized fries, so let me know. 10%,
Oh, there we are.
yeah,
10%. So they haven't reached the threshold to get delegates on the Democratic side. In order to get delegates, you're going to have 15% of the vote in a congressional district to qualify for delegates
But
in the
this
district.
is with less than half of precincts
So
reporting.
we'll see if that bumps up.
Still got a ways to go.
Still got a ways to go.
I want to point something out because we've got about 12 more minutes before we go off of our live stream, and then we'll send you over to FOX6 News, the broadcast, but or the live stream as well. But I want to talk about 4 years ago, because 4 years ago we were doing this, sort of still feeling out this digital stream, this election coverage, and if you recall, that was in your basement.
That was in my basement.
And we were literally piecing together like wires and trying to, how are we going to make this work from Amanda's basement? So it wasn't Joe Biden campaigning from his basement. It was Amanda, Brian, and Jenna at the time.
We got a viewer email that was like, what a horrible studio setup. You look like you're in someone's basement.
And we were in someone's basement. We actually had to move your daughter's toys, as I recall, out of the way.
We
and try
did.
to
And
make
I was
that work.
pregnant with number 2. So we were in the basement and I was throwing up during the times that we were
But the quality of that live stream compared to where we are now, and I want to give the people behind the scenes, Kale Zimney, Sarah Smith, who have been so instrumental in making this, and all the other people, I mean, Craig Sween with the graphics, all of the other people who've made this happen. We have developed over the last 4 years better and better setups, and Kale keeps playing with new things, switchers, and let's try this software. And now we've got our podcast studio, our digital studio. This is where we record and produce Open Record. If you don't listen to Open Record, subscribe if you haven't already. But
that was a nice
now
little plug.
we have this.
We have to move so many fewer toys now. It's great.
This is such a great setup, and in fact, this desk we are at now is a brand new desk that will be used, I believe, for coverage of the Republican National Convention, which of course is coming to Milwaukee in just a few short months. So this is like we're giving this thing a trial run, and it seems to be doing all right. So I just want to say I think this looks, sounds, feels great. It's a great place for us to be able to do this long form wall-to-wall coverage, and we're going to be doing this in November. So when the stakes are at their highest, when the 2024 presidential election is happening, we want to make sure you come back here and watch this live stream, because we will be back here doing all of this again. I'm sure we'll have Professor Lee back and all of that. So, look for this stream, tell others about it, and make plans to be here. So where are we seeing anything new in terms of, we still aren't seeing Milwaukee,
We
right?
got in our inbox, County Executive David Crowley's statement on spring election victory.
Yeah.
Even though we have 0%. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. We now, in County Executive, 55% of the precincts reporting, and he has 83% of the votes. So that mathematically looks like he's in good shape. He's declaring.
I'll read his statement here. He says, I am honored and thankful that the voters of Milwaukee County have placed their trust in me to serve our community for another 4 years. During my first term, we did amazing work in Milwaukee County. We've addressed the opioid epidemic, increased affordable housing options for our residents, expanded bus routes, and made our public spaces safer. We did all this while finally putting our county on solid financial footing and providing the largest property tax cut in Milwaukee County history. Together, we have delivered real results and improved the quality of life for Milwaukee County residents, but we're just getting started. Thank you, Milwaukee County. I can't wait to get back to work tomorrow. That is from County Executive David Crowley, who is claiming victory in the spring election.
And I want to be clear, he's Milwaukee County. What? Yes, I'm sorry?
We do have a yes call for the election officials only referendum.
Oh, okay.
That is being called. Okay, so that is the question number 2, correct? Mm-hmm. So question number 2 is being called as a yes, meaning that it will allow only election officials to participate in the administration of elections. Is that right, Jason?
Right, and it puts that into the Constitution. So you have the power, you have the final say to amend the Constitution. That is your duty, your power, and you use that tonight to put explicitly into the state constitution that only election officials are the ones who can administer elections.
So when does that go into effect?
Jason will be researching it back
I can tell you this. There's a whole process where it will have to be certified. There's going to be, it's a statewide race, so the Wisconsin Elections Commissioners will gather together after this is certified at the local. There's a whole huge process where the local officials will canvass the results and make sure all the math adds up and all of that. That takes a while. Then it goes to the state, and the state will then do the same thing. They'll repeat that math, make sure everything adds up, and then they will certify the statewide race there.
But this will apply to the November election.
It would go into effect once it's published.
Okay.
And so, you may remember that the Secretary of State publishes these things, and they have a little wiggle room on timing, but we're going to expect that will be in place shortly. I don't know the exact time because, again, that whole canvassing and verifying the vote process will take some time, and then the Wisconsin Elections Commission.
I see Sarah raising her hand, and I think I know which one you're talking about.
Yes,
question 1.
Another yes call for the question number 1.
I was about to say that race looked like it had narrowed because it's only showing a 4% a gap with 46% of precincts reporting, but I see the yellow check marks. So our election data nerds are calling this one, right?
So that is a victory for the Republicans in the legislature who wanted to pass this through the normal legislative process, and this was something that the governor would veto. They were able to bypass the governor's veto by going through the constitutional amendment process, which entails them passing it in 2 consecutive sessions, and then a vote of the people. That was your vote tonight, to ban these outside nonprofit or outside groups funding local election administration. We saw this in 2020 when we had the pandemic, where this outside group was funding municipalities across the state of Wisconsin to help them run the election during the pandemic. So, for example, buying things like sanitizer, buying drop boxes for the absentee ballots. Those were things that municipalities across the state purchased. We saw most of the money going to the 5 largest cities, Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, Kenosha, and Racine. And of course, those are Democratic stronghold cities. Republicans have called these grants from outside groups Zuckerbucks. They have criticized these outside grants, and now tonight they got their wish. They got to go around the governor because the governor has no power to veto. This is your final say, and you said that we should ban outside grants coming to local election workers, election clerks. The other thing that's interesting is Milwaukee really quickly accepted a grant because they knew that this was going on the ballot April 2nd. So they just recently accepted a grant to buy, it was like $786,000 from another nonprofit outside group. They were going to spend that money before today in the hopes of being able to utilize that before the Constitution was amended to ban the process in the future moving forward. So some of the things they're buying with that money, tabulators, those are high-speed tabulators that count the ballots. They're also going to be buying...
Which Milwaukee has had well-documented issues with counting ballots quickly.
Right. Yeah, and so they said in their petition for getting the Common Council to accept the grant, they said this will help us on election night to process the ballots more quickly. They also are purchasing the touch screens that are used for early voting as well as for disabled voters with disabilities. They use a touch screen to press who they want to vote for, and then it prints out the paper ballot. Because remember, in Wisconsin, we always have paper ballots 100% of the time. And then the other thing they're going to be buying is cell phones, so that with this outside grant, Milwaukee's going to be buying cell phones so that the election poll workers at each of the polling places can call the election officials at the city election commission if they have any questions. They're also going to be buying security cameras and lighting for the warehouse that stores all of the election gear. They're going to be adding the security there. They already have cameras, but they're going to be increasing the number of cameras and also outdoor lighting of that warehouse on KK.
So I know we have the Milwaukee County executive numbers up, but just real quick to wrap up the constitutional amendment stuff, how often does the state constitution actually get amended?
It's a way that
no, like how often? Like, do we know like how many amendments there have actually gone through? The voters have said yes to.
There was one
in the
just
last,
we know
however many years.
I think it's fairly infrequent. I know that we had one just, I think it was last year or the year before, was related to judges and what they can consider when setting bond. That was a result, and many people say that was a result of the Waukesha parade tragedy. And you know, some people behind that say that was in the works for a long time before that. It is a process that is intentionally difficult, passing 2 consecutive legislative sessions and then passing a vote of the state, all voters in the state. So it is a difficult process. It is not something that happens all the time. 2 of them at once, I think that's fairly unusual.
Yeah, so looking at some of the data, it's been amended 130, 140, 150 times in history, and the state was founded in 1848. So can somebody do the math, Brian or Amanda?
No,
it's certainly,
we cannot.
Certainly less than 1 a year over the history of the state
on average,
Wisconsin.
So here we go.
All right, so we have Mayor Cavalier Johnson with 59% of the precincts reporting, with a significant lead over David King, and this would be Cavalier Johnson's first full term. Is that right?
That's right. It would be.
In an election to fill the remainder of the seat vacated by longtime Mayor Tom Barrett when he accepted his ambassadorship. This would be his first full election with a significant lead there. We are coming up on the end of this live stream. We do not have numbers on the MPS referendum. Nothing coming in on that at the moment. If we get that before we go here in the next 60 seconds or so, we'll let you know what we have. Otherwise, we encourage you to keep watching the numbers at Kenosha Mayor. Kenosha Mayor, is that a call? Or do we have numbers where they are right now?
We have 71% of precincts reporting, and we're seeing Alderman David Bagdala taking the lead over Lydia Spotswood. David Bagdala has been on Common Council for about 16 years on the Common Council. So Alderman Lydia Spotswood ran for Congress, actually lost against Paul Ryan when he was first running for Congress. And so she's was trying to run for mayor here. She looks like she's behind.
But keep watching our numbers at fox6now.com. We've got the election results coming in, and on Fox 6 News, the broadcast, which will be coming up in just a few moments, and that will take over the live stream at fox6now.com. So keep watching for that. We look forward to seeing you back here in November. Amanda, Jason, and I assume all three of us will be back doing this again, and we'd love to have you back here because the stakes are going to be as high as they get for the President of the United States. Thanks again for watching us on our live stream. And I've been getting the stretch side. That's what Kale is. He does this. That means, Brian, keep talking, and that's something I do well. What do we have? About 5 seconds? Okay. Well, I talked just long enough to say, have a great night.
Good night.